Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a long, slow, and frankly, quite uncomfortable journey back in time. We're heading to the late 18th century, and our destination is the brand new, terrifyingly unknown continent of Australia. But we're not going as explorers or wealthy adventurers. Oh no, we're going as convicts on the First Fleet, and our focus tonight won't be on the grand adventure of discovery, but on something far more fundamental: the food, or, more accurately, the profound lack of anything you'd recognize as edible. It's a story that shatters any romantic notions of sailing the high seas. Honestly, you'd be lucky to survive the first week, let alone the whole 8 months. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always cool to see our little community spread out across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air in London hangs thick and heavy. It's a grimy cocktail of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, the damp chill rising from the Thames, and the faint, ever-present smell of gin. It's 1786th. Your world is a maze of cobblestone alleys, slick with mud and refuse, and you are hungry. It's not a dramatic, fleeting hunger. It's a deep, gnawing ache that has been your constant companion for as long as you can remember. Your stomach is a hollow, aching knot. You're huddled in a doorway, trying to be invisible, watching a baker pull a fresh tray of bread from his oven. The steam billows out into the cold air, carrying a scent so rich, so unbelievably good, it almost makes you dizzy. The loaves are golden brown, dusted with flour. You can almost feel the warmth. Imagine the soft, yielding texture. It's not just food, it's a memory of a time when things were, perhaps, a little better. Your mind isn't working on a grand plan. There's no complex calculation of risk versus reward. There is only the bread. A moment of distraction, the baker turns his back to shout at a passing cart, and your legs are moving before you've even made a conscious decision. Your hand, thin and grimy, darts out. It closes around a small loaf still warm, impossibly soft. For a single, glorious second, it's yours. Then, a rough hand clamps down on your shoulder, spinning you around. The baker, his face red with fury, snatches the bread back. Your brief moment of hope evaporates. You are dragged, kicking feebly, to the nearest constable. It's all a blur of shouting, rough hands, and the jeers of onlookers who have seen this little drama play out 1,000 times. You end up in a courtroom. It's a grim, imposing place. The judge, perched high above you in a powdered wig, looks bored. This is just another Tuesday for him. You barely understand the legal jargon being thrown around, but you understand the gravity of the situation. This is the era of what historians now call the Bloody Code. It's a rather fitting name, considering there were over 200 offenses, many of them shockingly minor, that could earn you a white ticket to the gallows. Stealing a loaf of bread, oh, that's definitely on the list. You brace yourself for the worst. You've seen public hangings at Tyburn. It's a grim, theatrical, and terrifyingly final affair. But then, something unexpected happens. The judge mutters something about the prisons being full and the colonies needing labor. He talks about a new plan, a grand venture to a place called New South Wales. It's a name that means nothing to you. It sounds like a place from a fantasy story. Instead of a noose, you are sentenced to transportation for 7 years. Now, why were you chosen for transportation instead of the gallows? Was it mercy, or was it simply a numbers game? Historians still debate the exact criteria. Some argue it was a calculated policy to populate a new continent with able-bodied if and willing workers, while others believe it was often just the arbitrary whim of the judge on that particular day, perhaps influenced by what he had for breakfast. You don't know and you don't care. All you know is that you're not going to hang. And here's a truly strange little piece of legal trivia from the time. In some cases, a judge would formally sentence a person to death, only to have that sentence immediately recorded and then officially commuted to transportation. It was a bizarre piece of judicial theater. In the eyes of the law, you were technically a dead person, now being given a second, albeit very strange, life on the other side of the world. A ghost in the machine of the British Empire. You are led out of the courtroom in chains, not towards the gallows, but towards the river, towards the hulking, shadowy shapes of decommissioned warships moored on the Thames. Your grand, 8-month journey to a new world has begun. But first, you're about to experience an appetizer of the misery that awaits. The chains on your wrists and ankles are heavy. They clink with a dull, rhythmic finality as you and a dozen other men are marched through the muddy streets towards the riverbank. The guards are impatient, prodding you along with wooden staves, their faces set in masks of bored indifference. You don't dare look up. You just focus on the grimy cobblestones under your worn-out shoes. One step after another, then you smell it. A stench that overpowers even London's signature aroma. It's the smell of stagnant water, rotting wood, and something else. Something sickly sweet and foul that catches in the back of your throat. It's the smell of concentrated human misery. You finally raise your eyes and see them. The hulks. They are monstrous. These are not the proud, seafaring vessels you might imagine. They are the skeletons of once great warships, their masts cut down, their hulls blackened with grime and algae. They float listlessly on the brown water of the Thames, tethered to the shore like chained beasts. Portholes, now barred, stare out like vacant eyes. They are floating coffins, and they are to be your new home, for now. This is a key part of your story, a sort of grim purgatory before the real journey begins. These prison hulks were the British government's ingenious, if horrifying, solution to a major problem. For decades, they had simply shipped their convicts off to the American colonies. But then, those pesky colonists went and had a revolution, and suddenly, that convenient dumping ground was closed for business. The prisons on land filled to bursting, and in a moment of grim pragmatism, the authorities decided to repurpose these old, decommissioned naval ships. It was meant to be a temporary fix, but temporary in government terms can be a very long time. You are shoved onto a lurching rowboat and ferried across the short stretch of water. As you get closer, the sheer scale of the decay becomes apparent. The wood is splintered and soft with rot. Green slime clings to the waterline. You can hear a low, constant murmur coming from within the ship, a blend of coughing, groaning, and the faint, unsettling sound of hundreds of men crammed into a space meant for cannons and gunpowder. A guard shows you up a rickety gangplank and onto the deck. The first thing you do is lose your footing. The deck is slick with a nasty film of grime and moisture. You are herded with the others into a line. A surly officer with a ledger takes down your name, your crime, your sentence. He doesn't look at you. You are just a name on a list, a piece of human cargo to be processed. You are stripped of your ragged clothes, which are probably burned, and given a coarse, shapeless uniform of rough, undyed wolf. Its Stygian smells faintly of dampened previous owners. Then comes the descent. You are pushed towards a hatch and forced down a steep ladder into the 'tween decks. The darkness is almost absolute, broken only by a few slivers of light from the barred portholes. The air is thick, hot, and so foul it's a physical effort to breathe. It's a humid, suffocating blanket of unwashed bodies, stale breath, and the ever-present stench from the bilge water below. Hundreds of men are packed in here. Hammocks are slung so close together they touch, listless. Others sit on the floor, gambling with buttons or carved bits of bone. They all turn to look at you, the newcomer, with the same dull, assessing gaze. There's no welcome, no hostility. Just a weary acceptance of another soul joining their floating hell. Here, in this crowded darkness, the debates of learned men in London seem a world away. Yet, they were having them. Historians still argue about the true purpose of the hulks. Were they intended as a genuine place of reform, where hard labor and discipline would turn us inner into a productive citizen, or were they, as it so clearly feels to you now, simply a way to keep the undesirables out of sight and out of mind? A system of punishment designed for maximum misery and minimum cost. Looking at the hollow eyes around you, you have a pretty strong opinion on the matter. And what about that curious little quirk of the system? Some scholars point out that, for all their horror, the hulks had a slightly lower mortality rate than the notoriously disease-ridden prisons on land. It's a grim fun fact. The constant rocking in the slight draft of river air, foul as it was, might have been marginally better than the stagnant, germ-filled air of a place like Newgate Prison. A tiny, almost laughable silver lining on a very dark cloud. Your first meal arrives. It's not served so much as distributed. A guard lowers a bucket of grey watery gruel, and you are given a wooden bowl and a chipped spoon. You get a ladle full of the stuff, along with a chunk of bread that is hard, but not yet crawling with insects. That's a pleasure reserved for the main voyage. The gruel is tasteless, gritty, and lukewarm. It's sustenance but not food. This, you realize, is the opening act. This is the appetizer, as your grimly humorous bunkmate calls it, a preview of the culinary delights that await you on the long voyage to the end of the world. Weeks pass in a monotonous blur, until one morning, the guard stomps down the ladder, holding a list, and bellows your name. It's time. Time to leave this floating prison for another. The morning air feels impossibly fresh, a stark contrast to the recycled breath of the hulk. Even the fishy, industrial scent of the Thames seems like a luxury. You're marched out onto the deck, squinting in the pale, watery sunlight. Your legs feel unsteady, not just from the chains, but from weeks of disuse in the cramped confines below. You're part of a long, shuffling line of men and a few women, all blinking in the light like creatures disturbed from a long hibernation. You're herded from the hulk to the docks, a gauntlet of curious, and mostly hostile, stares from the public. People have gathered to watch the spectacle. They point, they jeer, they throw bits of rubbish. To them, you're not a person who stole a loaf of bread out of desperation. You're a caricature, a villain from a penny dreadful, being cast out of decent society. It's a degrading, public shaming, and all you can do is keep your head down and focus on not tripping over your own chains. And then you see it, your ship. It's moored at the end of the pier, and your first impression is one of disappointment from the stories whispered on the hulk. You half expected another monstrous, rotting behemoth. But this ship looks, well, it looks like a ship. It's not a grand man o' war, but it's not a decaying wreck either. It's a merchant vessel, likely a Persepolis collier or trade ship, its hull sturdy and freshly tarred, the rigging a complex web against the grey sky. It's called the Friendship to Grey Sky, or the Alexander or the Scarborough. You don't know its name, and it doesn't really matter. They all blur into one. This is one of the 6 convict transports of what will later be known as the First Fleet. This is a key piece of the historical puzzle. The First Fleet wasn't just a handful of convict ships. It was a major logistical undertaking, a flotilla of 11 vessels in total. There were the 6 transports, carrying the bulk of you and your fellow convicts. Then there were 3 store ships, laden with all the supplies, tools, seeds, livestock, and of course, food that were meant to establish a new colony from scratch. Then leading them all were 2 Royal Navy warships, the HMS Sirius and the HMS Supply, serving as escorts and command vessels. It was an entire floating town, a microcosm of British society setting sail for the unknown. As you get closer, the initial impression of a functional ship begins to fray at the edges. You notice the new, hastily constructed barricades on the deck. A high, thick wooden wall runs across the middle of the ship, separating the quarterdeck, the domain of the captain and officers, from the waist of the ship, where you will be allowed brief, supervised moments of fresh air. There are holes carved into this barricade, just large enough to poke a musket through. Unspoken message: this is not a passenger vessel. This is a prison, and its design is all about control. You're forced up the gangplank, your iron-cuffed hands grabbing the rope railing for balance. The deck boards are solid under your feet. This feels different from the hulk. This vessel is designed to move, to face the open ocean. It feels alive, even at anchor. The crew, a mix of Royal Navy sailors and merchant seamen, watch you with a mixture of pity and contempt. They're not prisoners, but their lives for the next 8 months will be inextricably tied to yours. You are lined up again. The ship's surgeon, a man who looks profoundly weary before the journey has even begun, gives you a cursory inspection. He checks your eyes, makes you open your mouth, HES not looking for health, but for signs of active, contagious disease, specifically smallpox or the Gale fever typhus that was rampant in prisons. A sick convict could wipe out half the ship. If you can stand and breathe, you're deemed fit for the voyage. Now, a bit of morbid trivia for you. The process of choosing which convicts went on which ship was, like so many things, the subject of debate and some confusion. Were the most hardened criminals put on the most secure ships, or were they distributed randomly? Historians poring over the records suggest it was mostly a logistical scramble. You went on the ship that had space on the day you were processed. The idea of carefully curating the passenger list seems to have been a luxury the overstretched administration simply couldn't afford. There was no grand psychological profiling. You were just a body to be transported. And here's where the academic debate really heats up: the readiness of the fleet itself. Captain Arthur Phillip, the commander of the whole expedition, was a meticulous and deeply concerned leader. His letters from this time are filled with frantic complaints to the Admiralty. He argued that the ships were leaving too late in the season, that the food provisions were of poor quality, and that the clothing provided for the convicts was totally inadequate for the southern winter they would eventually face. Some historians paint him as a Cassandra, a voice of reason ignored by a complacent bureaucracy. Others argue that, given the unprecedented scale of the undertaking, the delays and shortcomings were inevitable. You, standing on the deck in your thin, itchy woolens, have a strong feeling that Captain Phillip might have been onto something. You don't have much time to ponder the ship's architecture. The guards are yelling, pushing you forward. You are about to be introduced to your home for the next 8 months. A place that will make the Thames hulk feel like a fond, distant memory. The command to move is sharp, a barked order that cuts through the chaotic sounds of the dock. You're prodded towards a dark, square hole in the deck, a gaping mouth leading down into the belly of the ship. The steep, narrow ladder disappears into the gloom. This is the main hatchway, the only way in or out of your new world. The descent is clumsy and dangerous. Your leg irons catch on the rungs, and the man behind you stumbles, his weight pressing you forward. You cling to the rough wooden sides, the smell rising up to meet you. It's the familiar stench of the hulk, but with a new, maritime twist: the acrid smell of tar, the dampness of bilge water, and the dry, dusty scent of the ship's ballast. You step off the last rung and your feet land on the floor of the prison deck. For a moment, you can't see a thing. The darkness is profound, a thick, velvety blackness that swallows you whole. Your eyes slowly, painfully, begin to adjust, and the shapes of your new reality emerge from the shadows. You are in a long, low silenting cavern. The massive, curved timbers of the ship's hull form the walls, like the ribs of a giant beast that has swallowed you whole. The ceiling is so low that a tall man can't stand up straight. Down the center of the space runs a row of thick, wooden pillars, the ship's masts and support beams. There are no hammocks here like on the hulk. There are only wide, rough-hewn wooden platforms running along either side of the hull. These are your beds. You and 3 other men will be allotted a space roughly 6 feet square. There's no mattress, no pillow, just the hard, splintery wood. You are not alone. The space is already filling with other men, a confused and grumbling mass of humanity. You find a spot on one of the platforms and sit down, pulling your knees to your chest, trying to make yourself as small as possible. The guards above drop a heavy iron grate over the hatchway, plunging you back into near total darkness. A thick bolt is slammed home. The sound echoes through the hold, a definitive, metallic clang of finality. You are locked in. This space, the tween decks, is the heart of the convict experience. It was never designed for human habitation. On a normal voyage, this area would be crammed with cargo barrels, crates, and sacks. Now its cargo is human. On your ship, there might be close to 200 men packed into this single area. The women convicts have a separate, though equally crowded, section, often separated only by a thin wooden bulkhead. A single lantern, swaying gently with the ship's slight movement at anchor, is lit and hung from a central beam. It casts long, dancing shadows, making the space feel even more cavernous and strange. In its flickering light, you see the faces of your fellow prisoners. They are a motley collection of humanity, pale-faced city dwellers like yourself, weathered farmhands, and tough-looking characters who seem more at home in this environment than you are. The rules of this new world are quickly established, not by the guards, but by the inmates themselves. Unspoken territories are claimed. Mess groups of 6 men are formed, as this is how the food rations will be distributed. You find yourself in a group with a quiet, older man who was a weaver, a talkative young pickpocket, and a hulking, silent brute of a man who everyone seems to give a wide berth. Your survival, you realize, will depend heavily on this small, randomly assigned family. Now for a little detail of shipboard life that often gets overlooked: the toilet situation, or rather, the lack thereof. In one corner of the hold are several large, heavy wooden tubs. These are the toilets. They are used by everyone, and they are only emptied once a day, by hauling them up to the deck. The smell, as you can imagine, quickly becomes a defining feature of your existence. The constant, gut-wrenching stench will be the backdrop to every meal, every conversation, every attempt at sleep for the next 8 months. It's a small, disgusting detail, but one that was central to the daily reality of life below decks. The ship is still in port, and for the first few days, there's a strange sense of limbo. You can hear the sounds of the world outside, the shouts of sailors, the creak of cranes loading the store ships, the distant bells of a London church. It's a tantalizing, tortuous reminder of the world you've left behind. And here, in this dimly lit hold, you hear the first whispers of a debate that historians still grapple with. You and your fellow convicts are not just prisoners, you are the foundation of a new colony. But what kind of foundation are you? Were you, as some early accounts claim, the absolute dregs of society, the boatload of hardened, irredeemable criminals, or, as more recent analysis of the record suggests, were the majority of you simply the victims of poverty and a brutal legal system, petty thieves, minor offenders, people who were more unfortunate than evil? The truth, as always, is likely somewhere in the middle. For every truly dangerous criminal in your hold, there are a dozen people like you who made one stupid, desperate mistake. The academic world still argues over the level of organization and hygiene that Captain Philip tried to enforce. He issued strict orders about cleaning the decks, airing out the bedding, and the use of vinegar as a disinfectant. But how effectively could these orders be followed down here, in the crowded darkness? It's a constant battle against filth, vermin, and despair. You hear the rats, scrabbling in the darkness. Long before you see one, they are bold and numerous. Another population sharing your new home. A few days into your confinement, the ship lurches. It's a new motion, not the gentle rocking at anchor, but a more decisive, rolling sway. A new sound joins the chorus of creaks and groans, the sound of water rushing past the hull, just inches from your head. The shouting on deck sounds more urgent, more purposeful. The anchor has been unfurled. You are moving. You are finally, irreversibly, on your way. The ship isn't just moving, it's alive. The gentle, predictable rocket anchor is gone, replaced by a complex, three-dimensional motion. The floor beneath you rises, falls, sways, and pitches all at the same time. The timbers of the hull, which had been mostly silent, now groan and creak like an old man's bones. Every loose object in the hold a stray spoon. A misplaced bowl slides and rattles across the deck with each roll. For the first hour, it's novel, almost exciting. You are finally underway. But the novelty wears off with alarming speed. A cold, queasy feeling starts in the pit of your stomach. Your head feels light, and a cold sweat breaks out on your forehead. The stale air in the hold suddenly feels 10 times more suffocating. This is it. Sees Inscus. It hits you like a physical blow. You lurch towards the foul-smelling tubs in the corner, joining a growing chorus of retching, groaning men. Your stomach heaves, expelling the pathetic bit of gruel you had for breakfast. But it doesn't stop there. It continues to clench and spasm long after it's empty, leaving you weak and trembling. You are not alone. The hold transforms into a scene of mass misery. The air, already thick with the stench of unwashed bodies in the latrine tubs, now fills with the acrid, sour smell of vomit. Men are retching where they lie, too weak or to overcome to move. The hulking, silent man from your mess group is curled in a ball, his face a pale shade of green. The talkative pickpocket is uncharacteristically silent, his head in his hands. It's a great equalizer. No matter how tough or clever you are, your inner ear doesn't lie. This experience, while deeply personal and miserable for you, is a universal part of maritime history. For centuries, seas Inscus or Maldine, there was simply an accepted horror of sea travel. There were no effective remedies. Sailors would offer you folk cures, stare at the horizon impossible in your dark hold, chew on dry bread a cruel joke, given your rations, or drink a little seawater a truly terrible idea. The only real cure was time. Either you got your sea legs after a few days, or you remained miserable for the entire voyage. The ship is navigating the English Channel, a notoriously choppy and turbulent stretch of water. The motion is relentless. You try to lie down, but the wooden platform seems to buck beneath you. You try to sit up, but that makes the dizziness worse. The only constant is the nausea and the rhythmic creak-groan splash of the ship plowing through the waves. And now a curious little piece of 18th century naval medicine. While most officers and sailors simply saw seas Inscus as a weakness to be endured, some ship surgeons had their own theories. One prevailing idea was that it was caused by a disruption of the humors, the bodily fluids that were thought to control health. The prescribed treatment, bloodletting. The solution for a person already weakened and dehydrated by vomiting was to intentionally drain some of their blood to rebalance the system. It's a perfect example of a medical intervention being far worse than the condition it was meant to treat. Thankfully, your surgeon seems too overwhelmed with the sheer scale of the sickness to attempt any such cures. Food is still distributed, but the very idea of eating is repulsive. Your messmate, the old weaver, who seems to have a stronger stomach than most, collects your group's ration, a lump of salty cheese and some hard biscuits. He offers you a piece, but you just shake your head, turning away from the smell. The precious calories are wasted, at least for now. The historical debate here isn't about whether seas Inscus happened, but about how it was managed and what its long-term effects were. Some accounts from the First Fleet barely mention it, treating it as a trivial, initial discomfort, but other letters and diaries, particularly from the more observant officers, describe the profound impact it had. They worried that the convicts, already in poor physical condition from their time in prison, were being further weakened right at the start of the voyage. This initial bout of sickness made them more vulnerable to the diseases that were sure to follow. The question for historians is, how much did this initial, universal misery contribute to the overall death toll of the voyage? Was it the first domino to fall in a long chain of suffering? Days blur into a nauseous haze. You lose track of time. Is it the third day, the fourth? The only markers are the guards lowering the buckets of rations and hoisting up the latrine tubs. You exist in a state of suspended animation, too sick to think, too sick to care about your destination or your fate. All that exists is the lurch of the ship and the knot in your stomach. Then, one morning, you wake up and something has changed. The motion of the ship is different. It's no longer the chaotic, choppy pitching of the channel. It's a long, slow, deep roll. The ship feels like it's breathing with the ocean now, a steady, rhythmic rise and fall. You sit up. The dizziness is still there, but it's a faint echo of what it was. You feel a new sensation, one you haven't felt in what seems like an eternity. Hunger, a faint, tentative gnawing in your stomach. Your sea legs have arrived. The old weaver offers you a piece of biscuit. This time you take it. It's hard and tasteless, but it's solid. You are past the first trial. You have survived the English Channel. But the ship has now entered the vast, open Atlantic, and the real routines of the voyage are about to begin. Starting with your first proper meal at sea, your newfound sea legs coincide with the establishment of the ship's unyielding routine. The initial chaos has subsided, and now life is governed by bells and the distribution of rations. Your stomach, no longer an open rebellion, is making its demands known with a persistent, hollow ache. It's time for your first real taste of the sailor's diet. It's time to meet the first member of what the sailors sardonically call the holy trinity of shipboard cuisine: salted meat. A call echoes from the deck above. Your mess group huddles together as a net is lowered through the hatch. In it is your ration for the next few days: a large, ugly-looking chunk of dark, reddish-brown meat, glistening with a crust of coarse, salt crystals. It's heavy, dense, and has a faint, slightly sweet smell of decay that the salt can't entirely mask. This is your beef. The old weaver from your mess, who has clearly been on a ship before, takes charge. He produces a small knife and sets to work trying to cut the meat into 6 equal portions. It's not easy. The meat is incredibly tough, more like wood than flesh. He has to saw at it, putting his weight behind the blade. The sound is less like carving a roast and more like cutting a piece of leather. This is the cornerstone of your protein intake for the voyage. The preservation method is ancient and brutal. The meat, either beef or pork, is packed in barrels layered with massive quantities of salt. This process draws out the moisture, making it inhospitable to most bacteria and allowing it to be stored for months, even years. The result is a product that is technically edible, but only in the most generous sense of the word. The Royal Navy had a specific name for this stuffed salt horse. The name was a morbid joke, suggesting the meat was as tough as a horse and possibly made from one. It was infamous. Sailors would joke that the only way to eat it was to soak it for a day, boil it for 2, and then throw it overboard and eat the pot. You get your portion. It's a dry, fibrous brick. You try to chew a piece raw, as you see some of the tougher-looking convicts do. It's a mistake. The saltness is overwhelming, a burning, chemical taste that makes your eyes water. And it's impossibly tough. Chewing it is like trying to eat a shoe. You quickly realize it needs to be cooked. The problem is, cooking facilities are limited. Once a day, a large cauldron, known as a copper, is lit on the deck. Each mess group is allowed to put their rations into a net bag, labeled with a carved wooden tag, and lower it into the boiling water. The water is usually seawater, which only adds to the saltness. You hand your piece of meat over to the weaver, who adds it to the mess bag. An hour later, it comes back up. The cooked meat is no more tender. It's just hot, wet, and somehow even saltier. The boiling has done little to soften the dense muscle fibers. You gnaw on it, your jaw aching with the effort. You manage to tear off small, stringy pieces and swallow them with a grimace. This is your fuel. This is what will keep you alive. Here's a bizarre and well-documented fact about this salt meat. It was so hard and durable that sailors and convicts would carve it. Just like you might whittle a piece of wood. They would take pieces of salt horse and carve them into objects, boxes, buttons, dominoes, even intricate models of ships. The finished products were, as hard as mahogany and would last indefinitely. Imagine food so inedible that its primary use becomes arts and crafts. It tells you everything you need to know. Now, the historical debate surrounding this food is fascinating. It's not about whether it was bad, everyone agreed it was terrible. The debate is about the procurement and quality control. The Victualling Board of the Royal Navy was responsible for supplying all this food. They operated on a system of contracts with private suppliers. And as you can imagine, it was a system ripe for corruption. Suppliers would use the oldest, cheapest, lowest quality meat they could find. They would use barrels that weren't properly sealed. Sometimes, the meat was already turning when it was packed. Captain Philip, before the first fleet even sailed, lodged formal complaints about the provisions. He inspected the barrels and found the meat to be very bad. But he was overruled. The bureaucracy insisted the supplies were adequate. So, were the officials in London ignorant, incompetent, or simply corrupt? Historians still argue about the extent of the rot in the system. Was it a few bad apples, or was the entire supply chain fundamentally flawed? The piece of leathery, salt-encrusted beef in your hand is exhibit A in that long-running argument. You force down the last of your portion, your throat burning from the salt. You are desperately thirsty, but your water ration for the day is still hours away. You lean back against the rough hull of the ship, your stomach full but not satisfied. It feels like you've swallowed a rock. You've now met the first member of the unholy trinity of your diet. You have a sinking feeling that the other two are not going to be an improvement. And you were absolutely right. The day after your formal introduction to Salt Horse, you meet the second member of the culinary trinity, the ship's biscuit. You've had bread on the hulk, and even your stolen loaf feels like a distant, beautiful dream. So when the guards lower sacks of what look like large pale crackers, there's a flicker of something resembling hope. Bread, in any form, is a connection to a more civilized world. This hope is quickly, and extinguished. Your mess crew perceives a cheer. You're handed a few thick, off-white discs, about the size of your palm and nearly an inch thick. They are incredibly dense and heavy. This is not bread. This is hardtack, also known as ship's biscuit. See bread, or less charitably, molar breakers. You try to take a bite. It's like trying to bite into a piece of slate. Your teeth, already feeling a bit tender from the general misery of your situation, can't make a dent. You knock it against the wooden bunk, and it makes a sharp, resonant clack. It's more mineral than vegetable. The old weaver from your mess, with a weary sigh, shows you the proper technique. You have to smash it. He places his biscuit on the floor and brings a small, scavenged piece of metal down on it, shattering it into more manageable, bite-sized chunks. The recipe for hardtack is brutally simple: flour, water, maybe a little salt. That's it. No yeast, no fat, no anything that could spoil. The dough is mixed into a stiff paste, rolled out, and baked, or rather, baked, and then baked again and again until every last molecule of moisture has been driven out. The result is a food product with the shelf life of a brick. Properly stored, hardtack from the 18th century is still technically edible today. Whether you do want to eat it is another question entirely. So you have your shattered pieces of biscuit. You pop one in your mouth and begin to suck on it, letting your saliva slowly soften it to a point where you can risk chewing. It has almost no taste at all. It's just a gritty, floury paste, but it's calories. It fills the stomach. You learn to dunk it in your ration of grog, the watered-down rum, or, if you're lucky, in the greasy water your salt meat was boiled in. This dunking is not just for flavor, it's a structural necessity. But there's another, more important, reason for dunking your biscuit. As you examine a larger piece, you notice it's riddled with tiny holes, like a miniature sponge. These are tunnels, and as the weaver taps his next biscuit sharply on the wooden platform, a few small, dark shapes fall out. They look like tiny, black grains of rice. These are weevils. Welcome to the most infamous feature of the hardtack experience. These are flour weevils, and they have been your constant, unseen dining companions since the day the flour was milled. The sacks of flour used to make the biscuits were almost always infested with their eggs. The baking process didn't kill them all. Deep inside the dense biscuit, the eggs would survive, and during the long warm weeks of the voyage, they would hatch. The larvae would eat their way through the biscuit, grow into adult weevils, and lay more eggs. The biscuit was not just food, it was a nursery. You stare at the little black specks. Your first instinct is revulsion, but the old weaver just shrugs. Extra protein, he mutters, and pops a piece in his mouth. And this is the cold, hard reality of it. You can't avoid them. Every biscuit is a weevil lottery. The sailors have a grimly pragmatic approach which you quickly adopt. It's called the weevil bargain. You tap the biscuit on the table. The adult weevils, which are bitter, tend to fall out. The larvae, which are fatty and tasteless, tend to stay inside. You knock out what you can and you eat the rest. In the dim light of the hold, you can't see them anyway. What you can't see, you try not to think about. This is not an exaggeration or a sailor's tall tale, it's a thoroughly documented historical fact that counts from virtually every long sea voyage of this era mentioned the weevils. They were as much a part of the diet as the salt in the beef. Some sailors even developed an arch fondness for them, calling them ship's companions. The academic debate around this isn't about their existence, but about the acceptable level of infestation. The Navy's victualling board had standards, on paper at least. They would inspect the flour and the biscuits, but their methods were crude, and a clever, corrupt supplier knew how to hide the worst of his stock. Was a certain amount of insect life simply accepted as inevitable, or was the presence of weevils always considered a failure of supply? The records are ambiguous. Some officials seem to treat it as a serious problem, while others write about it as if it's just a normal part of life at sea. For the men actually eating the biscuits, it was a non-debate. You ate the weevils, or you starved. And here's a quirky little side note that highlights the desperation. While the weevils were an unwanted addition, they were at least a known quantity. Sometimes other things got into the flour sacks, maggots, cockroaches, and their droppings were common. Sailors would tell stories of biscuits that, when broken open, were a writhing, living mass. In a strange hierarchy of disgust, the dry, crunchy weevil was considered the lesser of many possible evils. You finish your portion of hardtack, weevils and all. The gritty paste coats your mouth. You've now had 2/3 of your standard meal. A lump of salty, leathery meat and a piece of insect-infested hardtack. All that's left is the vegetable portion. Surely that has to be better. You look towards the cauldron on the deck, where another net bag is being hoisted up, this one full of small, grayish pellets. The peas are ready. You've endured the salt horse and made your peace with the weevils in your biscuit. Now it's time to complete the holy trinity of your diet with the vegetable portion. On the menu today and most other days are dried peas. This sounds almost promising. Peas are familiar. They're a humble, comforting food. You picture a warm, soft, mushy bowl of peas pudding, a staple of working-class food back in England. That picture is about to be comprehensively ruined. Like the meat and the biscuits, the peas are all about preservation. They are harvested and then dried until they are little more than hard, shriveled pellets, barely recognizable as the sweet green vegetable they once were. They are stored in sacks, where they rattle around like pebbles. This is your source of fiber and, theoretically, some vitamins for the voyage. Your mess group receives its ration in a small cloth bag. They are grayish-yellow, wrinkled, and hard as stones. The weaver, your group's unofficial chef, size and prepares them for the cook pot. The standard method is to soak them for hours, ideally overnight, in fresh water to rehydrate them before boiling, but fresh water is a strictly ration commodity, far too precious to be used for soaking peas. So, they go straight into the communal cauldron filled with boiling seawater, sealed in your mess net bag. They are boiled for an hour, alongside the bags of salt meat. When your portion is tipped out into your wooden bowl, it's not the soft, comforting mush you imagined. It's a sad gray sludge in which many of the peas are still stubbornly, defiantly hard. Others have disintegrated into a watery, tasteless gruel. It's the worst of both worlds, crunchy and soupy at the same time. You take a spoonful. The ones that have softened have the texture of wallpaper paste and a vague, dusty flavor. The ones that haven't are a genuine dental hazard. You bite down on one end, it feels like a piece of gravel. You learn to sort of gum them, letting them soften in your mouth before attempting to swallow. It's a miserable, joyless process. The sailors have a name for this dish, peas bros. And they have a saying, peas bros hot, peas bros in the pot, 9 days old. This little rhyme tells you everything. It was a monotonous staple, often cooked in large batches and served for days on end, its quality declining with each passing day. And this brings us to a weirdly specific and fascinating problem of 18th century naval cooking, the phenomenon of the unboilable pea. Sometimes, for reasons no one at the time could understand, entire sacks of peas would simply refuse to soften, no matter how long they were boiled. They would rattle around in the pot for hours and come out just as hard as they went in. The crew would blame the cook would blame the peas, and everyone would go hungry. The actual scientific reason for this is something they couldn't have possibly known. It's related to the chemical composition of the peas in the water they were boiled in. Certain types of hard water, or water with a high mineral content like, say, seawater, can prevent the pectin in the peas' cell walls from breaking down. Modern science understands this to you. It's just another cruel mystery of the sea. It's a fun little tidbit of food science that had profound and hungry consequences for your ancestors at sea. The academic debate surrounding this part of the diet revolves around a single, crucial question: nutrition. The men who planned your voyage weren't stupid. They knew that a diet of only meat and biscuit was a recipe for disaster. The peas, along with other rations like oatmeal and barley, were there to provide balance. They were the official defense against the one great terror of long sea voyages, scurvy. On paper, the diet was nutritionally adequate if unappetizing. The planners in London could point to their charts and ledgers and show that every man was receiving his allotted quantity of vegetables. But historians question the gap between theory and reality. How much nutritional value was actually left in a pea that had been dried for a year, stored in a sack, and then boiled for an hour in salt water? The answer, we now know, is very little. Specifically, the most crucial nutrient of all, vitamin C, is notoriously fragile. It's destroyed by heat, light, and prolonged storage. So while you are technically eating your vegetables, you are receiving almost none of the benefits. The peas are, for the most part, just stomach filler. They are a bureaucratic solution to a biological problem, and the solution doesn't work. You push the last of the gritty, watery sludge around your bowl. This is it, your standard meal, a trifecta of disappointment. Salt meat that makes your jaw ache, weevil-infested biscuits that threaten your teeth, then these stubborn, tasteless peas. This is what you will eat, day in and day out, for the better part of a year. The sheer, grinding monotony of it is a punishment in itself. You start to crave things with a startling intensity. The memory of the baker's warm loaf is a recurring, tortuous dream. You would commit another crime for a crisp apple, a soft piece of cheese, or a simple, boiled potato. The meal is over. You are left with a salty, pasty film in your mouth and a deep, unsatisfied feeling, and a powerful thirst, which brings you to the next crucial, and strictly controlled, part of your daily existence, the water ration. The thirst is a constant companion, a dry, scratchy feeling at the back of your throat that the salty food only intensifies. You force down your meal of salt horse, hardtack, and peas bros, and now every cell in your body is crying out for liquid. But you can't just go and get a drink. Water on board this ship is more precious than gold. Life revolves around the water ration. Twice a day, The guard and the ship's officer preside over the distribution. A large cask, known as a scuttlebutt, is brought out on deck. You and your fellow convicts are allowed up from the hold in small, supervised groups. The brief exposure to the open air and the sight of the vast, endless ocean only makes your thirst more acute. You line up, your wooden cup in hand. The officer, the purser's mate, stands by the cask with a ledger, ticking off your name. The guard operates the spigot. You hold out your cup and receive your allowance, about 3 pints a day. That's it. That's for everything drinking, washing, a laughable concept, and any cooking you might want to do, like attempting to soak your biscuits. In reality, every single drop is for drinking. The first mouthful is a shock. You expect fresh, clean water. What you get is lukewarm, brackish, and has a distinct off taste. It's flat and slightly slimy, with a woody flavor from the cask and a hint of something else. Something foul from the stagnant bilge water that sloshes around deep in the ship's hull, its fumes permeating everything. The water you're drinking today was loaded into wooden barrels back in London weeks ago, and it has been sitting there ever since, sloshing around, slowly going stale. The barrels themselves weren't always new or clean. They might have previously held wine, or oil, or salted fish, and the residue taints the water. Over time, algae and bacteria begin to grow, creating a slimy green film on the inside of the barrel and giving the water its characteristic stench. This is the water that is supposed to keep you alive. This is a fundamental problem of the age of sail. There was no effective way to keep water fresh for a long voyage. The quality of the water in the barrels was a constant source of anxiety for any captain. The first few weeks, supply was usually fine, but as the voyage wore on, the water from barrels tapped later would be progressively worse. But you have another drink to look forward to. Along with your water, you are entitled to a daily ration of alcohol. This isn't a luxury, it's considered a vital part of the daily routine, for both the convicts and the crew. You don't get pure spirits, you get grog. Grog is a naval invention with a very specific history. For years, sailors in the Royal Navy were given a daily ration of straight rum or brandy. The problem was, they would often save up their rations and get stupendously drunk, leading to accidents, undisciplined problems. In 1740, an admiral named Edward Vernon, whose nickname was Old Grog because of the waterproof Girogram cloak he wore, came up with a solution. He ordered that the daily rum ration be mixed with water. Furious at this dilution of their beloved spirit, named the new concoction grog in his honor. So, you get your cup of grog. It's a mixture of 1 part rum to about 3 or 4 parts of that foul-tasting water. The strong, sweet, fiery taste of the rum does a remarkable job of masking the slim inness of the water. It goes down easy, warming your stomach and bringing a brief, fuzzy sense of well-being. For a few precious moments, the misery of your situation recedes. The grog is a tool of social control, the small daily pleasure that makes an unbearable life just a little more bearable. And here's a quirky little fact about your grog sometimes. It was more than just rum and water. To make it more palatable, and in a misguided attempt to ward off scurvy, captains would sometimes order lemon or lime juice to be added to the mix. This is the origin of the nickname Limmy for British sailors. However, the effectiveness of this was often ruined by the way the juice was prepared. It was often boiled down into a concentrate, a process which, you guessed it, destroyed the vitamin C. So you get the flavor, but not the benefit. The academic debate here is about the role of alcohol on the First Fleet. Was it, as the authorities claimed, a necessary part of the diet, a way to make the water safe and boost morale, or was it, as some social historians argue, a major contributing factor to discipline problems, violence, and the general degradation of the convicts? The record show both sides. There are numerous accounts of convicts being flogged for drunkenness, for stealing rum, or for fighting while under the influence. Yet, the daily grog ration was never seriously questioned. It was seen as a fundamental right of any man at sea. To deny it would have been to risk mutiny. It was a calculated risk, a double-edged sword that captains had to wield carefully. You finish your grog, the warmth spreading through your chest. The water in your cup you will sip carefully, making it last until the next distribution. You are herded back towards the hatch, back down into the stinking gloom of the hold. The brief respite is over. You lie down on your hard wooden bunk, the faint buzz of the rum in your head. As you drift into a restless sleep, you don't dream of escape or freedom. You dream of a calm, cool drink of clean, clear water. A few weeks into the voyage, a new kind of weariness begins to settle into your bones. It's not the exhaustion from seas in scass or the ache in your jaw from chewing salt horse. This is a deeper, more profound fatigue. A leaden feeling in your limbs, a fog in your brain. You feel slow, heavy, as if gravity has a stronger hold on you than on everyone else. You dismiss it at first. It's the boredom, the monotony, the lack of fresh air and proper sleep. Of course you're tired. Everyone is, but then you notice other little things. When you knock your hand against the wooden bunk, the bruise that forms seems darker than it should be, and it takes a long time to fade. Your joints have a dull, persistent ache. Then comes the most specific and alarming symptom. You're chewing on a piece of hardtack you've softened in your grog, and you feel a strange tenderness in your mouth. Later, you run your tongue over your gums. They feel puffy, swollen, and strangely spongy. When you press on them, a tiny bead of blood wells up. You try to ignore it, but the next day, it's worse. When you rinse your mouth with a little of your precious water ration, the water comes out pink. You are not alone. You hear men complaining of the same things in hushed, worried tones. You see them examining their own mouths, their faces etched with a fear that is different from the fear of a flogging or a storm. This is a fear of something internal, something rotting from within. This is the beginning of scurvy. Today we know scurvy as a deficiency of vitamin C, ascorbic acid. It's a simple, easily preventable condition. But in the 18th century, it was a terrifying, mysterious plague of the sea. It had killed more sailors than storms, shipwrecks, and naval combat combined. It was the great, unsolved mystery of long-distance sailing. Here's the basic science, which you are now experiencing firsthand. Your body needs vitamin C to produce collagen. Collagen is the glue that holds you together. It's a vital protein for building and repairing skin, blood vessels, bones, and cartilage. Without a fresh supply of vitamin C, your body's ability to maintain itself begins to fail. The process is slow, insidious, and devastating. The first signs are exactly what you're feeling: fatigue, lethargy, aching joints. Then the breakdown of your capillaries begins. This is why you bruise so easily. The tiny blood vessels under your skin are becoming fragile and leaky. The same thing is happening in your gums, which are rich with tiny blood vessels. They become swollen, they bleed, and they can develop painful sores. You don't know any of this, of course. To you, it's just a creeping sickness with no name and no clear cause. You look around at the other men in the dim lantern light. Their faces look pale and drawn. The general health of the hold is deteriorating. A dry, hacking cough seems to be shared by everyone. Small cuts and sores that would have healed in days back on land now fester and refuse to close. This is a key historical point. The convicts of the First Fleet were already at high risk before they even set sail. Their diets in the prisons and hulks of England were poor. Many of them were already hovering on the edge of malnutrition. They boarded the ships with very low reserves of vitamin C. The clock was ticking from the moment they left port. And now for a truly weird and unpleasant bit of scurvy trivia. As the disease progresses, old wounds can spontaneously reopen. Scars that have been healed for years can break down, the flesh pulling apart as if the original injury had just occurred. A broken bone that healed a decade ago might begin to ache and feel weak as the collagen matrix within the bone dissolves. It's as if the body is deconstructing itself, forgetting how it was put together. The academic debate here is intense, and it centers on the man in charge, Captain Arthur Phillip. He was acutely aware of the danger of scurvy. The official medical wisdom of the time was a confusing mess of conflicting theories. Some doctors believed it was caused by bad air in the hold. Others thought it was a result of laziness. A Scottish naval surgeon named James Lind had conducted an experiment in the 1742 that strongly suggested citrus fruits were a cure, but his findings were not widely accepted or understood. The Admiralty's official cure was a substance called rob of orange and lemon, a syrupy concentrate which we now know was useless, as the boiling process destroyed the vitamin C. So, what did Philip believe? Was he a man ahead of his time who understood the new theories about diet? Or was he just a diligent officer following the standard, flawed procedures the historical evidence is mixed? He certainly lobbied for better and fresher food before the voyage, and he would later make crucial stops to procure fresh supplies. But at this stage, in the middle of the Atlantic, he's relying on the official, inadequate stores. Historians argue endlessly about whether he could have done more, or if he was simply doing the best he could with the flawed knowledge of his era. You, of course, know nothing of these high-level debates. You only know that your gums are bleeding and you feel a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. You feel a creeping dread that this journey is not just a passage from one continent to another, but a slow, inexorable march towards decay. The ship is sailing towards its first port of call, a place called Tenerife. For the officers, it's a chance to get fresh water and wine. For you, it's a desperate, burning hope for something, anything fresh and green. The mood in the hold has been growing heavier with each passing day. The fatigue and the quiet complaints about aching joints and bleeding gums have cast a pall over everyone. But then, a new kind of energy ripples through the ship. A change in the sounds from the deck, a flurry of organized activity, and a fresh, earthy smell carried on the breeze, a scent you haven't smelled in what feels like a lifetime. It's the smell of land. After 3 weeks at sea, the first fleet has arrived at Santa Cruz, the main port of Tenerife, in the Canary Islands. For you, this is a moment of profound, almost painful hope. You are herded up on deck in your usual small groups, not just for air, but to witness the spectacle. And it is a spectacle. After seeing nothing but an endless, shifting expanse of gray-blue water, the sight of a mountain rising from the sea is staggering. The land is a vibrant green, impossibly lush, with buildings clinging to the hillsides. The harbor is bustling with ships, their flags bright in the sunshine. The air is warm and filled with the sounds of a living town church bells, shouting merchants, the barking of dogs. It's a sensory overload after the monotonous deprivation of the voyage. This stop was a crucial, planned part of the journey. The primary reason was to take on fresh water and wine, but for Captain Phillip, it was an absolutely vital opportunity to get fresh food and combat the early signs of scurvy that he knew were appearing among the convicts and crew. You watch from behind the barricades as longboats ferry officers and sailors to and from the shore. You see them returning laden with treasures more valuable to you than any pirate's gold. They bring back huge bunches of green bananas, sacks of potatoes and onions, and net bags overflowing with oranges. Bright, round, and glowing in the sun is almost too much to bear. Your mouth floods with saliva, a physical, desperate craving for the sharp, clean taste of citrus. And then a miracle. The fresh provisions are not just for the officers' tables. Philip has ordered a general distribution. A guard comes to your mess group and hands over a share of the bounty. You are given a few onions, some potatoes, and a single, perfect orange. You hold the orange in your hands. It feels heavy, real. The skin is cool and slightly waxy. You dig your thumbnail into it, and the zest releases an explosive fragrance spray. It's the most beautiful smell in the world. You peel it slowly, deliberately, making the moment last. You separate the segments. They are plump and bursting with juice. You put the first piece in your mouth. The taste is electric. It's a shock to your system, a burst of sharp, sweet, acidic flavor that cuts through the months of salty, greasy blandness. The juice runs down your chin. It's not just food, it's medicine. It's life. Every cell in your body seems to rejoice. You eat the entire orange, peel and all, not wanting to waste a single bit of it. This moment is more than just a pleasant meal. It's a key historical event in the story of the First Fleet. This provisioning stop at Tenerife, and a later one at Rio de Janeiro, are what saved the voyage from becoming a catastrophe. Captain Phillips' insistence on buying and distributing these fresh vegetables and fruits, especially the citrus, arrested the advance of scurvy. While his medical knowledge may have been based on a mix of theories, his practical actions were exactly right. Here's a curious little fact about this stopover. While the convicts were seeing fresh fruit for the first time in months, the officers were busy with diplomacy. The Spanish governor of Tenerife was initially suspicious of this huge, armed British fleet appearing in his harbor. Was it an invasion? For Philip had to engage in careful, formal diplomatic exchanges, assuring the governor that his intentions were peaceful and that he was merely on a mission to establish a colony on the other side of the world. It's a strange juxtaposition as you are experiencing the life-altering joy of an orange. Your captain is navigating the delicate politics of the Spanish Empire. The academic debate here focuses on the impact of this stop. How bad was the scurvy? Really, some historians, looking at the low number of deaths in this early stage of the voyage, argue that the threat was perhaps exaggerated. They suggest that the initial outbreak was mild and that the fleet was never in serious danger. Others, however, point to the ship's urchin's logs, which record the telltale symptoms you've been experiencing. They argue that the fleet was on the cusp of a major health crisis, and that Philip's actions at Tenerife were the critical intervention that prevented a disaster. The fact that the First Fleet arrived in Australia without a single death from scurvy, an almost unheard of achievement for such a long voyage at the time, is the central piece of evidence in this debate. Was it good luck or good management? For the week you are anchored at Tenerife, your diet is transformed. The potatoes and onions are boiled in the cauldron, creating a thick, flavorful stew that feels like a feast. The salt horse is almost palatable when cooked with fresh vegetables. For a brief, blissful period, you eat like a human being again. Your gums stop bleeding. The leaden fatigue in your limbs begins to lift. You feel a flicker of strength returning, but the stop is temporary. The water casks are filled, the supplies are loaded, and the order is given to weigh anchor. You watch the green island shrink behind you, disappearing back into the vast blue of the ocean. You are heading south now, towards the equator, and into the hottest, most dangerous part of the voyage. The memory of the orange is a bright, beautiful thing, but you know the salt horse and the weevils are waiting. The fresh, pleasant breezes that carried you away from Tenerife slowly die down. The ship's motion, which had been a purposeful surge, becomes a slow, lazy, and unpredictable wallow. The sails, which had been taut and full, now hang limp from the masts, occasionally flapping with a sound like tired thunder. You have entered the doldrums. This is a region near the equator known for its calms and weak, baffling winds. For a sailing ship, it's a special kind of hell. You are trapped, making agonizingly slow progress, sometimes sitting completely still for days on end under a relentless, brassy sun. And the heat. The heat. The heat is a physical presence. The sun beats down on the deck, and the pitch between the planks softens and bubbles. The air is thick, wet, and heavy. There is no escape from it. The brief moments you're allowed on deck are scorching, but the situation below, in the hold, is far worse. Your prison deck becomes a furnace. With no wind to circulate the air, the hold becomes a stagnant, suffocating oven. The heat radiates from the ship's hull, and the combined body heat of 200 men raises the temperature to unbearable levels. Sweat pours off you, soaking your coarse wool uniform, which chafes your skin raw. The air is so thick with humidity and the ever-present stench of the latrine tubs that it feels like you're breathing water. Sleep is almost impossible. You lie on the hard wooden platform, slick with sweat, listening to the groans and curses of the men around you. The darkness is sweltering, absolute, and claustrophobic. This oppressive heat has another, more sinister effect. It accelerates decay. Everything starts to rot. The ship's timbers, constantly damp in the humidity, begin to grow a fine green fuzz of mold. Your own few belongings, the clothes on your back, feel permanently damp and smell of mildew. But the real crisis is the food. The remaining fresh vegetables from Tenerife are the first to go. The potatoes sprout pale, ghostly tendrils. The onions turn often black with rot. They are thrown overboard, a sad, final reminder of your brief feast. The core rations, the Holy Trinity, begin to suffer too. The hardtack biscuits, already a haven for weevils, now become breeding grounds for mold in the humid air. You start to find patches of blue and green fuzz on them. You scrape it off as best you can and eat the rest. But the worst is the meat. The salt, which was supposed to preserve it, fights a losing battle against the tropical heat. When a new barrel of salt pork is opened, the stench that erupts is gag-inducing. It's a foul, sweet, putrid smell that tells you the meat was not just old, but actively decaying. The fat has a rancid, sour taste, and the meat itself is soft and stringy in a way that suggests decomposition rather than tenderness. This is a well-documented crisis of the voyage. The Purser's records show large quantities of meat and flour being condemned as unfit for human consumption and thrown overboard. For you, this is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you are spared from eating rotten food. On the other hand, it means your rations are cut. A condemned barrel is not always replaced. You simply get less. The gnawing hunger that has been your constant companion becomes sharper, more demanding. And what about the water? The heat turns the water in the casks foul, even faster. It becomes thick with algae, slimy and warm. Drinking it is an act of will, forcing down the tepid, swampy liquid to combat the dehydrating effects of the relentless sweating. Here's a bizarre fact about crossing the equator in the 18th century, the crossing the line ceremony. This was a raucous, often brutal, tradition for sailors who had never crossed the equator before. They would be summoned before a sailor dressed as King Neptune, the god of the sea. They would be shaved with a rusty, notched piece of iron and a lather of tar and slush, then dunked backwards into a tub of foul seawater. It was a form of ritualized hazing, a rite of passage. Did this happen on the First Fleet? Historians are divided. Some accounts suggest that on the more disciplined naval vessels, it was a fairly tame affair, but on the convict transports, it was likely banned altogether. The officers would not have wanted to sanction a ceremony that could easily get out of hand and lead to injury or riot among the prisoners. You are spared the dunking, but you endure the heat that made the ceremony such an ordeal. The academic debate here centers on logistics and blame. When the food went bad, who was responsible? Was it simply an unavoidable consequence of 18th century food preservation technology hitting the tropics, or was it proof of what Captain Phillip had been complaining about all along, that the provisions were substandard from the very beginning? Some historians defend the victualling board, arguing they did the best they could with the knowledge they had. Others paint a picture of a corrupt system where suppliers, knowing the food wouldn't be eaten for months, felt free to provide the lowest quality goods, cutting corners on salting and packing. The rotting barrel of pork is, once again, evidence in a long-running historical trial. You lie in the suffocating darkness, your body weakened by heat, dehydration, and hunger. You feel a listlessness that goes beyond the physical. The hope you gained at Tenerife has evaporated in the equatorial sun. This part of the journey feels endless, a stagnant purgatory. You pray for wind, for anything to break the monotony in the oppressive heat. And as you drift in and out of a sweaty, restless sleep, You don't even have the energy to dream of good food. You just dream of a cool breeze. The heat and the boredom of the doldrums have frayed every owner's nerves. The suffocating hold is a pressure cooker of resentment and misery. It's in this stagnant atmosphere that you become acutely aware of the other inhabitants of your floating world. And I don't mean the sailors or your fellow convicts. I mean the vermin. They were always there, of course. You heard them from the first night, the faint scrabbling and scratching sounds in the darkness. But in the oppressive calm of the equator, with nothing else to distract you, their presence becomes impossible to ignore. The ship is teeming with life, and most of it is unwelcome. The weevils in your biscuits are old news. You've accepted them as part of the meal, but their cousins, the cockroaches, are another matter. They are everywhere. Big, glossy, and bold, they scuttle across the deck in the dim lantern light. They get into your clothes, your bedding, and if you're not careful, your food. You wake up sometimes feeling a tickle on your skin and have to violently shake your thin blanket to dislodge them. Then there are the rats. There are the rats. They are not the timid creatures you might imagine. These are ship's rats, large, clever, and fearless, their dark shapes darting along the beams overhead. They are your direct competitors for the dwindling and decaying food supply. At night, you can hear them gnawing at the wooden barrels of flour and the sacks of dried peas. Guards are often posted near the storerooms, not just to watch for human thieves, but to ward off the rats. The battle against the rats is a serious part of shipboard life. The ship's cat, if there is one, is a prized and important member of the crew, but one or two cats are no match for a population of hundreds, if not thousands, of rats. But the rats are wary. Sometimes a rat hunt is organized, where a section of the hold is cleared and men with clubs try to kill as many as they can. It's a brutal, chaotic, and ultimately futile exercise. The rats always come back. But here's where the grim reality of your situation takes a strange turn. As your official rations diminish and rot, your relationship with the ship's pests begins to change. That big, fat rat skittering past is no longer just a nuisance, it's meat. This is a stark, historical truth of many long, desperate sea voyages. When starvation looms, anything becomes a potential food source. Catching a rat is not easy, but for a man with a sharp eye and a quick hand, it's possible. The captured rat is skinned, gutted, and, if you can get it to the cook fire on deck, roasted on a stick. Some men, in the dark privacy of the hold, eat them raw. How does a rat taste? The accounts that survive are not exactly glowing culinary reviews. It's generally described as tough and stringy with a strong, game-y flavor. But it's fresh meat. It hasn't been soaking in a barrel of salt for 6 months. It's a source of protein and fat that your body desperately craves. For a man on the brink of malnutrition, a roasted rat is a feast. The disgust you might once have felt is a luxury you can no longer afford. And now for a truly odd piece of information about shipboard pests. While the rats and cockroaches were universally hated, there was one type of insect that was sometimes a welcome sight: the cricket. In the damp, foul-smelling hold, a cricket's cheerful chirping could be a strange comfort, a sound of life that wasn't a groan or a cough. Some sailors would even protect the crickets they found in their living quarters, seeing them as good luck charms. A tiny, six-legged spot of cheer in the overwhelming gloom. The academic debate around this topic is a delicate one. It touches on the very definition of survival. Official records, written by officers, rarely mention the convicts eating rats. To do so would be to admit that the official rations were failing, that the situation was becoming dangerously desperate. It would reflect badly on their management of the ship. Our knowledge of this practice comes from other sources: the journals of lower-ranking sailors, court-martial records that mention the theft of private food stores, and the memoirs of convicts written years later, after they had been freed. Historians must piece together these fragments to understand the unofficial diet of the voyage. Was rat eating a common, accepted practice born of necessity, or was it a rare, Desperate act undertaken only by the most degraded or starving individuals. The truth is likely that it existed on a spectrum from a semi-regular source of supplemental food to a last resort against starvation, depending on the ship, the stage of the voyage, and the state of the official stores. You lie on your bunk, listening to the sounds of the night, the snores and coughs of the men, the creak of the timbers, and the incessant, energetic scrabbling of the rats. You feel a sharp pang of hunger. You look into the darkness, and when you see a shadow dart across a moonbeam from a porthole, your first thought is no longer disgust. It's dinner. The voyage has changed you in ways you couldn't have imagined. You are becoming a creature of the ship, as much a part of its grim ecosystem as the pests you hunt. The stagnant heat of the doldrums eventually gives way to the steady trade winds, and the fleet begins to make good progress again. But the hunger, sharpened by the spoiled and reduced rations, has not gone away. It's a constant, gnawing presence, a hollow ache that colors every waking moment. And hunger, you are about to learn, is a powerful corrosive. It eats away at morale, at decency, and at the fragile social order of the hold. You have your mess group, the small family of 6 men who share their rations. In theory, it's a fair system. In practice, it's a daily source of tension. Every scrap of food is scrutinized. Is his piece of salt beef bigger than mine? Did he take more than his share of the peas? Bros, the talkative pickpocket in your group, becomes an expert at distracting others while he scoops a slightly larger portion from the communal bowl. The silent, hulking man simply uses intimidation, his glare daring anyone to challenge the size of his share. The trust within the group is thin and easily broken. This tension is a microcosm of a ship-wide problem. The convicts, starving and desperate, begin to eye the ship's main stores. They know that somewhere on this vessel, or on the accompanying store ships, there are barrels of food, sacks of flour, and casks of rum. And so, the thefts begin. They are usually small, desperate acts. A man on cleaning duty near the galley might try to snatch a handful of oatmeal. Another might find a way to siphon a little rum from a cask. These are not grand heists, they are the crimes of profound hunger. But the ship's command has a zero-tolerance policy for theft of rations. Food and water are the lifeblood of the voyage. To steal them is to threaten the survival of everyone on board. The punishment is swift, certain, and brutal. One morning, the call goes out for all hands and all convicts on deck. The mood is grim and formal. 2 Marines, their muskets at the ready, drag a man from your hold into the center of the waist deck. HES, a young man you vaguely recognize, accused of stealing a biscuit from the ship's stores. He is read his sentence, and then he is tied to a wooden grating. His back is bared. Another sailor steps forward. He is not a guard, but a fellow seem unchosen for the task. In his hand is a cat o' 9 tails. It's a terrifying instrument. Not a simple whip, but a handle from which hang 9 knotted leather or cord thongs. The first lash cracks through the air, and the man's body arches in a spasm of agony. A reed line appears on his back, then another, and another. The sound is sickening, a wet, percussive thud that echoes across the deck. The man screams at first, then his cries subside into low, guttural moans. You are forced to watch. This is not just a punishment, it's a piece of theater. It's a message to you and every other man on board. This is the price of a biscuit. Flogging was the cornerstone of discipline in the 18th century Navy and, by extension, on this convict fleet. It was a carefully calibrated system of pain, with the number of lashes precisely tailored to the severity of the crime. 12 lashes for a minor offense, hundreds for something like mutiny. For stealing food, a sentence of 2 or 3 dozen lashes was common. This spectacle is one of the most well-documented aspects of life on the First Fleet. The ship's logs are filled with brief, chilling entries punish John Smith with 24 lashes for theft of bread. For the officers writing the logs, it was a routine entry. For the man receiving the punishment, It was an agonizing ordeal that could leave him crippled for weeks, the wounds often becoming infected in the unsanitary conditions. Here's a grimly fascinating detail about the flogging process. After the punishment, the ship's surgeon would attend to the man's back. The standard treatment was to rinse the wounds with salt water. The theory was that this would clean them. In reality, it was an excruciatingly painful process that did little to prevent infection, though it may have had a mild antiseptic effect. It was, in essence, a second punishment. The academic debate surrounding this practice is not about whether it was brutal. It clearly was. The debate is about its effectiveness. Did these brutal punishments actually deter crime, or did they simply create a climate of fear and resentment, driving the convicts to be more cunning in their desperation? Some historians argue that without the terror of the lash, the fragile order of the ships would have completely collapsed under the pressures of hunger and confinement. They see it as a necessary evil. Other historians argue that the constant violence was counterproductive, that it dehumanized the convicts and sailors alike, and that a system based on better rations and more humane treatment would have been more effective in the long run. They point to the fact that the thefts continued. Despite the floggings, you watch as the semi-conscious man is cut down, his back a bloody ruin. He is dragged back down into the hold, where his messmates will have to care for him. The message has been received. You look at the faces of the men around you. You see fear, yes, but you also see a hard, sullen anger. The flogging has not united you with the authorities against the thief. It has drawn a line in the sand. It has drawn a line in the sand. It's them, the officers with their full bellies on the quarterdeck. And it's us, the hungry, desperate mass below. The hunger hasn't gone away. The desperation is still there. But now, it's mixed with a simmering rage. And you are all still only halfway to your destination. The next stop, the next chance for real food, is the port of Rio de Janeiro, and it still feels a world away. After what feels like an eternity crossing the Atlantic, a new excitement electrifies the ship. The fleet has navigated the treacherous coastal currents and is approaching the magnificent harbor of Rio de Janeiro. For the second time on this voyage, the impossible sight of land appears on the horizon. You are brought up on deck as the ship glides into the bay. The sight is even more breathtaking than Tenerife. A dramatic landscape of conical green mountains, including the famous Sugarloaf rises steeply from the water. The city of Rio nestles at their base, a vibrant sprawl of whitewashed buildings and red-tiled roofs. The harbor is alive with vessels of all shapes and sizes. After the desolate, empty expanse of the ocean, it's like stepping from a silent, monochrome room into a world of explosive color and sound. This month-long stop in Rio was, like the one in Tenerife, a critical part of Captain Phillips' plan. The ships needed repairs, the water casks needed to be scrubbed and refilled. But most importantly, the people needed to be fed. The scurvy that had been held at bay by the oranges of Tenerife was beginning to re-emerge. The fatigue, the aching joints, the bleeding gums, it was all coming back. Philip knew this was a vital opportunity to reset the health of his human cargo. From your position behind the barricades on the convict deck, you have a tantalizing, tortuous front row seat to a world of abundance. Rio is a major port of the Portuguese Empire, a hub of trade for the riches of Brazil. You watch the long boats go ashore and return laden with a bounty that makes the provisions from Tenerife seem meager. They bring back heaps of yams and cassava root. They bring net bags filled with pineapples, guavas, and plantains. And most importantly, they bring back mountains of citrus oranges, limes, and lemons, purchased in vast quantities. The sailors even bring back live animals, chickens, and a few pigs whose squawks and squeals are a strange, alien sound on the deck of the ship. You watch as the officers and sailors feast. You can smell the roasting pork from the galley, a rich, savory aroma that is almost physically painful. You see the crewmen sitting on the deck, casually peeling and eating oranges, tossing the peels overboard. For them, it's a welcome treat. For you, It's a vision of paradise just out of reach. But again, Captain Phillips' foresighted humanity come into play. He has ordered that the fresh provisions are for everyone. The distribution begins. Your mess group is given a supply of yams, which when boiled are a starchy, satisfying replacement for the peas bros. You are given rice, a welcome change from the weevil-y hardtack, and you are given oranges. Glorious, life-giving oranges. That first taste is just as explosive as it was in Tenerife. It's a jolt of pure, vibrant life. You and the men around you devour the fruit, the juice dripping down your arms. For a few beautiful days, the ship's diet is transformed. The daily ration of salt beef is boiled with fresh yams and onions. The rice is served on the side. It's a real meal. The cloud of lethargy begins to lift. The bleeding in your gums subsides. You can feel strength flowing back into your limbs. And now for a strange little historical side note. While you are gorging on oranges, a quiet but significant act of scientific espionage is taking place. Captain Phillip and his officers are not just buying food. They are buying seeds and plant cuttings. They are collecting samples of coffee, cocoa, bananas, and I pack a medicinal plant. Their mission is not just to transport convicts, it's to establish a self-sustaining agricultural colony. They are gathering the botanical building blocks of a new society. So, while you're thinking about your next meal, your captain is thinking about the harvests of years to come. The academic debate around the Rio stopover revolves around the interactions between the British fleet and the Portuguese authorities. The Portuguese viceroy was deeply suspicious. Why was such a large British fleet? Here was the story about a convict colony in the far-off Pacific just a cover for a military or trade expedition aimed at muscling in on Brazil's riches. The relationship was tense. The convicts were kept under strict confinement, not allowed ashore. The sailors who did go ashore were notorious for getting into drunken brawls with the locals. There were diplomatic protests and official apologies. Historians argue about how close the situation came to open conflict. Was it a minor diplomatic spat, or a genuinely tense standoff? Philip's journals paint a picture of careful, frustrating diplomacy, trying to get the supplies he desperately needed without provoking an international incident. It's a reminder that this voyage was not happening in a vacuum. It was a small piece in the great game of 18th century European colonial rivalry. For you, these high-level politics are irrelevant. Your world is the ship, and the daily reality of your diet. For 1 month, life is better. But you are keenly aware that it's temporary. You watch the green mountains of Rio every day, a paradise you can see but never touch. The local merchants who are allowed on board to sell goods to the officers stare at you with a mixture of fear and pity. You are a pariah, a ghost at the feast. The day of departure arrives all too soon. The sails are raised and the ship points its bow southeast, out of the harbor and into the vast, turbulent waters of the South Atlantic. You are heading for the last stop before the great unknown, the Dutch colony at the Cape of Good Hope. The taste of the Rio oranges is still fresh in your memory, but a cold dread begins to creep in. The next leg of the journey is the longest and most dangerous of all, just waiting for its chance to return. The ship feels different as it leaves Rio. The festive, almost holiday-like atmosphere of the port is gone, replaced by a grim sense of purpose. The next leg of the journey is the big one, the crossing of the vast, empty ocean to the Cape of Good Hope. The health benefits of the fresh food from Brazil are real but fragile. Everyone knows it's a temporary reprieve, and slowly, insidiously, the old enemy begins to creep back. It starts as it always does with the little things. The deep, unshakable weariness returns. The dull ache in your joints becomes a more insistent throb, especially in your knees and ankles. The bruises reappear, and then the telltale sign: your gums, which had firmed up and healed in Rio, start to feel tender and spongy again. One morning, you see that familiar, dreaded pink tinge when you rinse your mouth. Scurvy is back, and this time, it seems to have a stronger, more confident grip. The disease progresses along its horrificously predictable path. The puffiness in your gums worsens, and they begin to bleed more freely. Eating the hardtack biscuit, even when softened, becomes an agonizing ordeal, the rough texture scraping against your raw, swollen gums. Your teeth, which felt solid just weeks ago, now feel loose in their sockets. You can wiggle them slightly with your tongue. The fear that they will simply fall out is constant and terrifying. Then comes a new and alarming symptom. Small, dark purple, and black spots begin to appear on your skin, mostly on your legs and feet. They look like tiny, dark bruises under the surface. This is petechia caused by spontaneous bleeding from the fragile capillaries. Your legs also begin to swell up, becoming puffy and bloated with fluid, a condition known as edema. They feel heavy and unresponsive. You are not alone in your misery. The hold is filled with the sounds of quiet suffering. Men groan in their sleep. Many are too weak to move from their bunks. The guards who come down to distribute the rations do so with a new urgency, their faces tight with a mixture of disgust and fear. The stench in the hold is worse than ever, the thick, sickly sweet smell of decay that seems to cling to the back of your throat. It's the smell of scurvy. This is the reality that often gets glossed over in the grand narrative of the First Fleet. The fact that no one officially died of scurvy on the voyage is a celebrated statistic, but it hides the truth that hundreds of men, perhaps the majority of the convicts, were suffering from it to varying degrees. They were living through the slow, agonizing process of their bodies falling apart. The ship's surgeon is overwhelmed. He moves through the hold, his face a mask of weary frustration. He has his standard-issue naval remedies, but he knows they are little more than placebos. He might prescribe the official rub of orange and lemon, the boiled-down syrup that you now know is useless. He might dose you with a elixir of vitriol, a solution of sulfuric acid, which was thought to tone the system. Or he might order a dose of Peruvian bark quinine, which was effective for malaria but useless for scurvy. And here's a particularly strange and unpleasant medical tidbit from the era. One of the more desperate cures for scurvy was the earth bath. The theory was that something in the effluvia of fresh soil had curative properties. A desperately ill man would be taken ashore. A pit would be dug, and he would be buried up to his neck in the fresh earth, where he would be left for several hours. This, of course, did nothing to address the vitamin deficiency and often just made the weakened man cold and miserable. Thankfully, out here in the middle of the ocean, you are spared this particular indignity. The academic debate here is a stark one. It centers on the ship's surgeon's logs. These documents are the primary source for understanding the health of the convicts. But how do we interpret them? Some surgeons, perhaps to protect their own reputations or to avoid alarming the captain, might have downplayed the severity of the outbreak. They might have recorded a man's symptoms as laziness, general debility, or a lingering cold, rather than using the dreaded word scurvy. Historians have to read between the lines. They cross-reference the logs with letters and journals from officers, looking for clues. When an officer writes about the convicts being listless and unfit for work, is he just commenting on their morale, or is he unknowingly describing the classic early symptoms of a massive scurvy outbreak? The official record shows a contained problem. The unofficial evidence points to a creeping disaster that was far more widespread and severe than the final death toll suggests. You lie on your bunk, your legs swollen, your mouth a source of constant, low-grade pain. The world has shrunk to the 6 square feet of your wooden platform. The hunger for food is still there, but it's overshadowed by a deeper, more fundamental decay. You feel yourself weakening, fading. The journey is no longer about reaching a destination. It's a race against your own body's decomposition. The mood in the hold is one of profound despair. The talk, the gambling, the petty squabbles, they have all died down, replaced by a heavy, groaning silence. All you can do is lie there, listen to the creak of the ship, and hope that you can hold on long enough to reach the Cape of Good Hope. It is your last chance. the last bastion of civilization before the final, terrifying leap into the unknown Southern Ocean. And you know, with a chilling certainty, that if you don't get fresh food there, you will not survive the rest of the voyage. You are barely conscious of the world outside your own bubble of pain and fatigue. The days blur into a monotonous cycle of misery, but you have one person whose job it is to pull you back from the brink, the ship's surgeon. He appears at your side, a lantern held by an assistant casting long, dancing shadows across the grim tableau of the hold. HES, a man caught in an impossible position. He is, by the standards of his day, a trained medical professional. He has likely studied at Edinburgh or London, apprenticed under other surgeons, and holds a warrant from the Navy Board. He is not a quack, but his knowledge is a frustrating mishmash of sound observation, ancient theory, and outright nonsense. He looks down at you, his expression a mixture of clinical detachment and pity. He asks you to open your mouth. You do, wincing as the movement pulls at your swollen, bleeding gums. He prods them gently with a metal tool, and fresh blood wells up. He nods grimly. HES seen this 100 times. He examines the dark, ugly blotches on your swollen legs. He presses a finger into the puffy flesh, and the indentation remains for a few seconds, a clear sign of edema. He checks your pulse, which is likely weakened thread Y. He asks you about your breathing, which is probably shallow and difficult. Now, what can he do for you? His medical chest is filled with the standard pharmacopoeia of the 18th century. He has options, none of them good. His first and most likely prescription is something you've already encountered, the official anti-score, but I see remedies provided by the Navy. He might give you a dose of the rob of citrus, the useless boiled syrup, or he might administer a spoonful of wort of malt, a sweet, unfermented infusion of malted barley. This was another popular, but ultimately ineffective remedy promoted by some influential naval figures. It tastes sweet and provides a few calories, but it contains no vitamin C. If HES a follower of a different medical theory, he might try to cleanse your system. This could involve a purgative, a powerful laxative made from things like senna or yolap, designed to violently empty your bowels. The theory was that scurvy was caused by a putrescence, or rot in the digestive system that needed to be expelled. For a man already weakened by malnutrition, this is a dangerous and dehydrating ordeal. Then, there is the great cure-all of the era, bloodletting. The surgeon might open a vein in your arm with a lancet, draining a few ounces of your bad blood into a small bowl. The idea was to rebalance your humors, the four bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, whose equilibrium was thought to govern health. Your blood would look dark and thick, which the surgeon would take as confirmation that it was diseased and needed to be removed. He is removing precious red blood cells from a body that is already struggling to maintain its tissues, further weakening you. This brings us to a weird piece of medical history, the portable soup. This was another of the Admiralty's scientific solutions to feeding men at sea. It was, essentially, a primitive woolen cube. It was made by boiling down meat and bones for hours and hours until it became a thick, gelatinous goo. This goo was then dried into hard, plastic-like slabs that could be stored for years. A piece of this soup could be dissolved in hot water to create a savory, if not particularly nutritious broth. The surgeon might prescribe this for you, spoon-feeding you the warm liquid. It's comforting, and it provides some hydration and calories, but it does nothing to halt the progress of the scurvy. The academic debate here is a fascinating one, focusing on the mindset of the 18th century ship's surgeon. Was he a hero fighting a mysterious disease with the best tools he had, or was he part of the problem, his harmful treatments doing more damage than? Good historians like to point out the conflict between what these surgeons were taught and what they could plainly see. They were taught that scurvy was about bad air or blockages, but they could see with their own eyes that when a ship reached port and the men ate fresh greens, they miraculously recovered. This created a huge cognitive dissonance. Some surgeons, like James Lind, made the leap and identified the dietary cause. But most tried to fit their observations into their existing theoretical framework. They might conclude that the fresh vegetables worked because they were cleansing or had some special property that thinned the blood. They were on the right track empirically, but for the wrong theoretical reasons. They saw the what but couldn't explain the why. The surgeon moves on to the next man, leaving you with a small cup of wort of malt. It's sweet, but it does nothing for the ache in your soul. You are a passive participant in your own treatment, a subject for a medical science that is groping in the dark. The surgeon is not a villain, he is as much a prisoner of his time as you are of this ship. But his amazing remedies are useless. Your only hope is not in his medical chest, but in the rumor that is now spreading through the hold like wildfire. Land has been sighted. The Cape of Good Hope is near. The news that land has been sighted ripples through the hold, but it doesn't create the same surge of excitement you felt approaching Tenerife or Rio. The collective mood is too low, the physical suffering too widespread. It's a quiet, desperate relief. For many, it's a feeling of just in time. You are half carried, half dragged up to the deck by your messmates to see it, and it is a formidable sight. Through the sea mist, you see a flat-topped mountain, its sides plunging dramatically into the churning sea. This is Table Mountain, the iconic landmark of the Cape of Good Hope. It looks vast, imposing, and a little menacing. This is the southern tip of Africa, the gateway between the Indian Oceans. This is the last stop, the last outpost of the familiar European world before the fleet makes its final, terrifying leap across the vast, empty southern ocean to Australia. Everyone, from Captain Philip down to the lowliest convict, understands the critical importance of this port call. There will be no more chances for fresh water, no more opportunities for fresh food. The supplies loaded here have to last for the remainder of the voyage, the longest and most dangerous leg of all. The fleet anchors in Table Bay, under the watchful eye of the Dutch colonists who control the Cape. This is a busy, well-established port, a vital refreshment station for the Dutch East India Company ships. The town of Cape Town nestles at the foot of the mountain, a neat grid of streets and whitewashed, gabled houses. Once again, you are a spectator to a frenzy of provisioning. Captain Philip, his anxiety about the health of the convicts at its peak, drives a hard bargain with the Dutch governor. He needs food, and he needs a lot of it. The prices are exorbitant. The Dutch know they have a captive market, but Philip pays. He knows he has no choice. The longboats begin their work, and the bounty they bring back is staggering. They bring sacks of fresh baked bread, a sight so beautiful it makes you weep. They bring back live animals, dozens of sheep and pigs, whose bleating and squealing now fill the air. The decks of the transport ships are turned into floating farmyards. They bring back mountains of fresh vegetables, cabbages, pumpkins, and anything else they can get their hands on. The effect on the convicts is almost instantaneous. The first meal of fresh-baked, soft bread is a revelation. It's the most delicious thing you have ever tasted. The ship's cooks get to work, slaughtering the sheep and boiling them in the great cauldrons with fresh vegetables. The result is a thick, rich, life-giving stew, a world away from the salty, stringy beef you've been enduring. Within days, a miracle occurs. It's the same miracle you witnessed in Rio, but it feels even more profound this time because you were so much closer to the edge. The bleeding in your gums stops. The swelling in your legs begins to subside. The dark spots on your skin start to fade. A little strength returns to your limbs. You can feel the life seeping back into you, pushing back the great tide of scurvy. And here's a quirky little detail from this stopover. In addition to the food, the fleet also loaded something else earth. They took on large quantities of soil-containing live plant specimens, carefully curated by the fleet's botanists. The hope was to transport living fragments of the African ecosystem to the new colony. So, while you were sinking your teeth into a piece of fresh mutton, the future gardens and farms of Australia were being loaded onto the store ships, containerized in the soil of the Cape. The academic debate surrounding the Cape Town stop focuses on a major decision Captain Philip made. he decided to split the fleet. He chose the fastest ship, the supply loaded it with the healthiest men and the most vital supplies, and decided to sail on ahead of the main body of the fleet. His goal was to get to Botany Bay as quickly as possible to prepare and excite and find a source of fresh water before the bulk of the sick and weakened convicts arrived. Was this a brilliant strategic move or a reckless gamble? Some historians praise it as a sign of Philip's proactive leadership, a way to mitigate the risks of a mass arrival. Others criticize it, arguing that it divided his forces and left the slower, more vulnerable transports without their fastest escort. It also meant that if Philip's advance party ran into trouble, they would be completely isolated. It was a calculated risk, and one that historians still dissect and debate. You watch as the small, swift shape of the supply detaches from the fleet and disappears over the horizon. It's a strange, unsettling feeling. The fleet feels smaller, more vulnerable without its leader. The remaining ships spend a month at the Cape, a month of healing and recovery. You eat your fill of fresh food, regaining your strength. But there's an undercurrent of anxiety. You stare out at the churning gray-green water of the South Atlantic. You know what lies beyond that. The Roaring Forties, a notorious belt of ferocious westerly winds and mountainous seas that sailors spoke of with awe and terror. The day of departure comes. The last of the live sheep are herded into their pens. The final casks of water are winched aboard. The order is given. The ship weighs anchor and turns its bow east into the vast emptiness of the Indian Ocean. You are healthier than you have been in months, but you are sailing towards the most feared waters on the planet. The final brutal test is about to begin. The familiar sight of land vanishes behind you for the last time. There is nothing now between you and the great unknown continent of New Holland but a vast, terrifying expanse of ocean. The ship turns southeast from the Cape, deliberately seeking out the latitude sailors call the Roaring Forties. This is not a place name you find on a map. It's a force of nature. It's a band of the southern hemisphere, roughly between 40 and 50 degrees of latitude, where there is no land to break the force of the wind. The westerlies howl around the globe, unimpeded, building up a terrifying amount of energy. Then that energy is transferred to the sea. The change is not gradual. It's as if you cross an invisible line. The long, rolling swells of the Atlantic are replaced by something far more violent. The sea becomes a chaos of mountainous waves. These are not the choppy, irregular waves of a coastal storm. These are huge, liquid mountains, their peaks frighteningly high, their troughs terrifyingly deep. The sky turns a perpetual, bruised gray. The ship, which felt so large and solid in harbor, is now a tiny, insignificant toy tossed about by immense forces. It doesn't just roll anymore. It surfs, skittering sideways down the face of a giant wave. It pitches, its bow plunging deep into the trough, sending a shudder through the entire vessel as tons of green water crash over the deck. Then its stern is lifted high. The propellers, if it had them, would be screaming in the air. For a terrifying moment, the ship seems to hang in space before beginning its next gut-wrenching plunge. Down in the hold, it is pure, unmitigated hell. You are thrown about with every lurch of the ship. It's impossible to stand, sit, or lie down without being braced against something. Men and loose objects slide across the deck, crashing into the opposite wall. The noise is deafening, a constant, thundering roar of the wind and waves, combined with the tortured screaming of the ship's timbers. It sounds as if the vessel is being torn apart, plank by plank. The hatches are battened down, sealed against the waves washing over the deck. You are plunged into near-total darkness, a black, suffocating, violent world. The air, with no circulation, quickly becomes foul. And of course, the sea's incus returns with a vengeance. The hold once again becomes a pit of misery. The floor slick with vomit and seawater that leaks through the seams in the deck above. Eating is a laughable concept. The galley fires on deck are extinguished. It's far too dangerous to have an open fire in these conditions. There is no hot food, no boiled meat, no peas bros. Your ration, when it can be distributed at all, is a chunk of salt beef and a hardtack biscuit, eaten cold if you can keep it down. Many can't. The precious fresh meat and bread from the Cape are a distant, beautiful memory. This is the great test of the ship and the crew. The sailors are on deck, their figures tiny against the maelstrom, fighting to control the vessel. They climb the icy, swaying rigging to reef the sails, their hands raw from the cold and the wet ropes. A single slip means certain death. A man vanishing into the churning gray sea in seconds, with no hope of rescue. And here's a fascinating, if terrifying, piece of nautical trivia. The sailors had a special name for the biggest waves in these seas, the graybeards. These were the monstrous, rogue waves that seemed to come from nowhere, towering over the others. An encounter with a graybeard was the ultimate test of a ship's integrity and a sailor's nerve. Being hit by one could put the ship, a term meaning the wave would crash down with such force it would drive the stern underwater, swamping the decks and threatening to sink the vessel entirely. The academic debate here focuses on the seamanship and navigation of the First Fleet's captains. The Roaring Forties were a known phenomenon, a high-risk, high-reward superhighway. By dipping down into these latitudes, a captain could shave weeks off the journey from the Cape to Australia. It was the fastest route, but it was also the most dangerous. How far south did they dare to go too far? And you risk encountering icebergs drifting up from the Antarctic. Don't go far enough, and you lose the benefit of the powerful winds. The ship's logs from this period are a testament to the skill of the captains. They show a constant balancing act, a dance with the elements. They track wind speed, wave height, and the ship's position with meticulous care. Historians who study these logs marvel at the skill required to navigate a clumsy, top-heavy transport vessel packed with human cargo through some of the worst seas in the world. Was it skill, or was it just luck that no ship was lost? For you, in the hold, it's not about skill or luck. It's about survival. You are cold, wet, bruised, then terrified. The storm rages for days, then weeks. You lose all track of time. The world is just noise, motion, and darkness. You huddle with your messmates for warmth, a small island of shared misery in the chaos. Then, one day, you notice a subtle change. The violence of the ship's motion seems to lessen slightly. The roar of the wind outside doesn't sound quite as high-pitched and furious. A sliver of light appears as a corner of the hatch cover is opened. The storm has not ended, but its peak has passed. The ship has survived the worst of the Roaring Forties. You are battered, weakened, and traumatized, but you are still afloat. And you are, unbelievably, getting closer to your final destination. The worst of the storm has passed, but the sea remains a hostile, turbulent gray. The ship still labors in the heavy swell, and the sky is a perpetual blanket of low, scudding clouds. The brief period of health and strength you gained at the Cape of Good Hope feels like a distant memory, washed away by the violence of the Roaring Forties. The physical toll of the storm was immense, but the psychological damage is just as profound. The constant fear, the darkness, the violent motion, it has worn everyone down to a raw nerve. And now, in the relative calm, the chronic miseries of the voyage reassert themselves with a vengeance. The hunger is back, sharper than ever. The live animals from the Cape are long gone. You are back to the holy trinity of salt beef, weevil-infested biscuits, and peas bros, and the quality of these rations, after so many months at sea, is at an all-time low. The last barrels of meat are scraped, and the beef is often greenish and slimy. The biscuits are more weevil than flour. The peas are just hard, tasteless pellets. The scurvy, which was beaten back so effectively by the fresh food, is returning. You feel that old, familiar ache in your bones, that spongy tenderness in your gums. But this time, it's coupled with a profound mental and emotional exhaustion. The fight has gone out of you. Your mind, starved of stimulation and weakened by malnutrition, begins to play tricks on you. You lie on your hard bunk in the dim, stale air of the hold, and you drift. You are not just sleeping, you are escaping into vivid, waking dreams. You find yourself back in London, not the grim, grimy London of your arrest, but an idealized version. You are sitting in a tavern, the air thick with the smell of roasting meat and wood smoke. A cheerful barmaid places a pewter tankard of ale in front of you, its foamy head perfect. She brings you a plate of thick slice of meat pie, the crust golden and flaky, steam rising from the rich gravy within. You can feel the warmth of the plate, the weight of the fork in your hand. You lift a piece to your mouth, and then the ship lurches, and you are back in the stinking hold, the taste of phantom gravy turning to ash in your mouth. These hallucinations are powerful and cruelly specific. They are always about food. You dream of the simple, tactile pleasures you once took for granted. The crisp snap of a fresh apple, the feeling of a warm loaf of bread in your hands, the sharp, clean taste of a wedge of cheese. You can conjure the smells, the textures, the tastes with such clarity that the return to reality is a physical blow. You are not alone in this. You hear men talking in their sleep, murmuring the names of foods. Pudding, one man groans. "A bit of bacon," whispers another. The entire hold is trapped in a collective, gastronomic hallucination. This psychological decay is a little discussed, but historically significant, part of the ordeal. The official logs record floggings, deaths, and disease outbreaks. They do not record the slow erosion of sanity. They do not chart the descent into a state where reality and memory begin to blur. And here's a quirky bit of maritime folklore that touches on this. Sailors have long told stories of phantom feasts and ghost ships. They would speak of seeing a fully rigged vessel sailing silently past them in a storm, its crew feasting at a grand table on deck, oblivious to the weather. These stories, often dismissed as superstition, may have their roots in the shared hallucinations of starved, exhausted, and isolated men, their minds projecting their deepest desires onto the empty canvas of the sea. The academic debate here focuses on the concept of convict morale. It's a difficult thing to measure from historical records. How do you quantify despair? How do you chart the loss of hope? Some historians, focusing on the records of punishments and attempted mutinies, argue that the convicts remained defiant and resistant to the very end. They paint a picture of a group that never broke, that held on to its rebellious spirit. Other historians, reading between the lines of journals and letters, suggest a different story. They argue that by this late stage of the voyage, what prevailed was not defiance, but a profound and debilitating apathy, a state of learned helplessness where the convicts were too physically and mentally broken to even contemplate resistance. They were no longer fighting the system, they were just trying to survive the next hour. The debate is about whether the dominant experience was one of anger or one of utter, soul-crushing despair. You lie there, trapped between the memory of a perfect meal and the reality of your gnawing hunger. Your mind is a fragile refuge and a cruel tormentor. The line between your inner world is becoming thin. The voyage has taken your freedom, your health, and your dignity. Now, it feels like it's starting to take your sanity as well. The only thing that keeps you anchored to reality is the routine of the ship and the grim companionship of your fellow sufferers. You are all in this together, adrift on a sea of hunger, somewhere on the edge of the world, somewhere on the edge of reason. All you can do is wait for it to end, one way or another. The days have become a blur. The gray sky and the gray sea are an endless, repeating canvas. The ship plows eastward, but it feels like you're not moving at all, just stuck in a single, miserable moment, stretched out to an eternity. Hope is a foreign country you can no longer remember visiting. It is in this state of profound apathy that the illusions begin. It's different from the food hallucinations. Those were internal, personal dreams. This is something else. It starts with a cry from the lookout high up in the mast. Land ho. A jolt goes through the ship. The word land is so alien, so powerful, It momentarily breaks through the collective stupor. Men who can barely stand stagger to the hatchways, desperate for a glimpse. You pull yourself up, your heart pounding with a forgotten excitement. You get to the deck and stare out at the horizon where the lookout is pointing. At first, you see nothing but the usual gray waves, but then you see it, or you think you see it. A dark line on the horizon. The low, hazy shape of a coastline. It's real. It has to be real. A murmur of excitement spreads among the convicts. Men are pointing, their faces alight. The officers are on the quarterdeck, their telescopes strained on the horizon. They are talking amongst themselves, their expressions not excited, but grimly focused. After a few minutes, the captain gives an order. The ship does not change course. It continues on its same eastward path, and as you watch, the land begins to do strange things. It seems to shimmer, to dissolve and reform. It lifts off the water, hovering in the air for a moment before vanishing completely. It was never there. It was a fata morgana. A complex, superior mirage caused by a temperature inversion over the cold southern ocean. The bending of light rays creates a distorted, displaced image of a distant object, or sometimes just the sea itself, making it look like a solid coastline. For a ship full of desperate men, it's a particularly cruel trick of the light. This is not a one-time event. It happens again a few days later, and again. The lookouts become hesitant to even make the call. The brief flashes of hope followed by the crushing disappointment are almost worse than the constant, grinding despair. You stop believing your own eyes. The world outside the ship has become untrustworthy, a canvas for phantoms. Your diet, the ultimate source of your misery, has now reached its absolute nadir. The last of the ship's original provisions are being consumed. The final barrels of salt pork are opened, and the stench is overwhelming. The meat is soft, almost gelatinous with decay, and has a disturbing iridescent sheen. The crew has a name for this stuff: Shackle's funk. It's barely recognizable as food. The biscuits are the worst. When you break one open now, it's not a matter of finding a few weevils. The biscuit itself seems to be alive, a writhing, moving mass of larvae held together by a thin, fluffy shell. There is no weevil bargain anymore. You can't tap them out. They are the biscuit. You close your eyes, try not to think, and swallow. You are eating insects, plain and simple, because the alternative is to eat nothing at all. And this brings us to a grim but fascinating piece of historical forensics. In modern times, archaeologists have excavated early convict sites in Australia. They have found the remains of these 18th century food stores. Analysis of the barrels and their contents confirms the written accounts in horrifying detail. They find the remains of the specific types of weevils and other beetles known to infest ship stores. They can analyze the chemical composition of the salt meat, confirming its poor quality. It's a strange and sobering experience to see the physical proof of the misery described in the journals, tangible evidence of the suffering you are now experiencing. The academic debate here touches on a very human question. How did they endure it faced with phantom lands undrotting, maggot-infested food? What kept them going? Some historians emphasize the role of discipline, the iron fist of the ship's command, the threat of the lash, which kept the men in line even in the most extreme circumstances. Other historians focus on the power of small-scale social bonds. They argue that the mess group, that randomly assigned family of 6, became the single, most important survival unit. Men looked out for each other, shared their scavenged extra food, cared for each other when sick, and perhaps most importantly, kept each other's despair at bay through simple conversation and companionship. In a world of illusions and decay, the presence of another human being, suffering alongside you, was the only solid thing to hold on to. It wasn't the grand structure of command, but the small, human connections in the dark that made survival possible. You lie on your bunk, the taste of rotten insects in your mouth. You no longer trust the sky or the sea. The world has been reduced to the stinking, cramped hold in the 5 other gaunt faces of your messmates. The hunger is no longer a sharp pain, it's a dull, permanent feature of your existence, like the color of your eyes. The voyage has gone on so long, you are starting to forget what it felt like to not be hungry, to not be a prisoner. This is just life now. You have reached the absolute limit of your endurance. Something has to break. You've given up, not in a dramatic, rebellious way, but in a quiet, internal sense. You no longer look for phantom lands. You no longer dream of food. You exist in a fog of dull, aching misery. The world has been reduced to the creak of the timbers and the shallow breaths of the man next to you. This, you assume, is how it will end. You will simply fade away in the stinking, dark corner of the world. Then, one morning, something changes. It's not a shout from the lookout. It's a smell. A faint, elusive scent on the air that filters down through the hatchway. It's not the familiar salt spray or the stench of the hold. It's a green, earthy smell, the smell of wood smoke and damp eucalyptus leaves. A smell of land, but this time, it feels different. A new kind of murmur spreads through the hold. It's not excitement, it's a hesitant, fragile, almost fearful curiosity. Is this another trick, another phantom to break their hearts? But the smell persists, growing stronger. And then you hear a new sound from the deck, the unmistakable cry of a shorebird. It's a sound that does not belong in the empty world of the ocean. You are helped up to the deck. And there it is. Not a hazy, distant line, but a solid, real, and utterly strange coastline. It's a long, low stretch of land covered in a dark, scrubby-looking forest unlike anything you've ever seen. The trees are tall and thin, with grayish-green leaves that hang down listlessly. The beach is a strip of brilliant white sand, and the water breaking on it, it is a stunning turquoise. It is stark, ancient, and profoundly alien. This is it. After 8 long, brutal months, you have arrived. This is the coast of New South Wales, the Great Southland. The ship sails slowly along the coast, looking for the landmark described in the maps of Captain Cook, who had charted this coast less than 2 decades earlier, Botany Bay. The sight of the land has a powerful, transformative effect on the men. The apathy that had gripped the hold for so long begins to break. Men are talking, pointing, their voices filled with a mixture of awe, relief, and apprehension. You had survived. You had actually crossed the world. This moment of arrival is one of the most significant in the history of the voyage. The First Fleet, against all odds, has reached its destination. It was a journey of over 15,000 miles, one of the longest continuous sea voyages ever attempted at that time. And the most remarkable statistic, the one that historians marvel at to this day, is the death toll. Of the roughly 780 convicts who left England, only around 40 died on the voyage. It's a mortality rate about 5%, in an era when a 20-30% death rate on such voyages was considered normal. This was an astonishing achievement. What was the secret? This is the core of a major historical debate. Was it the genius of Captain Phillip, with his obsessive focus on hygiene and his timely stops for fresh food? Was it the skill of the ship's captains in navigating the treacherous southern oceans? Was it the relative quality of the surgeons, who, despite their flawed medicine, were at least present and attempting to provide care? Or was it, as some more cynical historians suggest, simply a matter of luck, favorable winds, and the absence of a truly catastrophic disease outbreak like typhus or smallpox? There is no single answer. It was likely a combination of all these factors. And here's a quirky bit of trivia about that first sighting of land. For the E or A people, the indigenous inhabitants of this coastline, the sight of these 11 huge, strange vessels appearing silently on their horizon must have been a terrifying and inexplicable event. Their oral traditions, passed down through generations, describe the ships as floating islands, a completely alien phenomenon that heralded a profound and catastrophic change to their world. A moment of profound relief and the end of a long ordeal was for them the beginning of a new one. As the ships find the entrance to Botany Bay and glide into the calm, protected waters, a sense of profound unreality settles over you. The anchor chains rattle, and for the first time in months, the ship is still. The silence, after the constant noise and motion of the ocean, is deafening. You stare out at this new world. It's not the lush, tropical paradise that some of the sailors' stories might have suggested. It looks dry, harsh, and unwelcoming. The trees are strange, the bird calls are alien, and there is a profound, unnerving silence to the land itself. But it is land. It is solid ground. You have survived the salt horse, the weevils, the scurvy, the storms, and the despair. You have made it to the end of the earth. The long, nightmarish voyage is over. Now a new and entirely different challenge is about to begin survival in this strange new home. The anchor is down. The voyage is over. A wave of pure, unadulterated relief washes over you. You are no longer moving. The gentle lapping of water against the hull is the only sound. The air filtering down into the hold smells of dry leaves and damp earth. You made it, but the relief is quickly tempered by a new kind of anxiety. What happens now? The first days in Botany Bay are a strange limbo. The convicts are kept on board while the officers, led by Captain Philip, go ashore to explore. Philip had sailed ahead on the supply and has already been here for a few days, and the reports filtering back to your ship are not good. You watch from the deck as the exploration parties return, their faces grim. Botany Bay, which had sounded so promising on Captain Cook's maps, is a disappointment. The bay itself is shallow and exposed to the east winds, making it a poor anchorage. The fertile meadows Cook described are mostly swamp and sand. And worst of all, there is no reliable source of fresh water. The plan so carefully laid out in London is already failing. This is not the idyllic spot for a new settlement they had imagined. For the convicts, this is a time of confusion and growing impatience. You are so close to land, yet still confined to the floating prison that has been your torment for 8 months. The diet is still the same old ship's rations, because there is nothing on this shore that is immediately edible. The local Lee or A people are wary and keep their distance, occasionally appearing on the beach to shout and brandish their spears before melting back into the strange, gray-green bush. They are clearly not welcoming their new neighbors. This is a key moment of decision for Captain Philip, and it's one that historians study closely. He has orders to establish the colony at Botany Bay. To disregard those orders is a major risk, but his assessment of the site is that it's a death trap. To settle here would be to condemn the colony to failure from thirst and starvation. After a few days of fruitless searching, Philip makes a bold decision. He takes a small party in 3 long boats to explore a break in the coastline that Cook had noted a few miles to the north, which Cook had named Port Jackson. While he is gone, you wait. The days are hot. The flies, which swarm out from the shore in buzzing black clouds, are a new and deeply unpleasant torment. The mood on the ship begins to sour. The relief of arrival is curdling into the old, familiar frustration. Then, after 3 days, Philip's long boats return, and the news is electrifying. Port Jackson is not just a small inlet. It is, in Philip's own words, the finest harbor in the world. It has deep, protected anchorages and, most importantly, several streams providing an abundance of fresh, clean water. The decision is made. The settlement will not be at Botany Bay. The entire fleet will move to Port Jackson. And here's a truly remarkable coincidence of history. As the first fleet is preparing to leave Botany Bay, 2 other ships appear on the horizon. They are not British. They fly the flag of France. It is the expedition of Jean-François Pérouse, a French explorer on a scientific voyage around the world. He has sailed to Botany Bay expecting to find a fledgling British colony, following news he'd heard in Europe. Instead, he finds a fleet on the verge of leaving. Representatives of rival European empires greet each other formally in this remote, uncharted corner of the world. It's a surreal, almost comical, meeting at the end of the earth. The academic debate here centers on Philip's decision. Was it an act of insubordination to ignore his explicit orders, Or was it a pragmatic and necessary choice that saved the colony from certain doom? Most historians today laud Philip for his foresight and courage. He risked his career by making that call, but it was unquestionably the right one. The choice to move to the site that would become Sydney was the single most important decision in the early history of the settlement. For you, this is all high-level maneuvering. All you know is that the order has been given to weigh anchor again. For a terrifying moment, you wonder if you are going back to sea. But the ships don't turn east, they turn north, hugging the coast. After a few hours of sailing, the fleet turns into a narrow channel between two giant rocky headlands, and the view that opens up is breathtaking. It's a vast, sprawling harbor, with countless little coves and sandy beaches, all surrounded by the same rugged, eucalyptus-covered hills. The water is deep, calm, and blue. Philip has chosen a small cove, which he named Sydney Cove, after the British Home Secretary Lord Sydney. The ships drop anchor. This time, it's for good. The voyage is truly, finally over. The land you are looking at is your new home. Whether it's a prison or a new beginning, you don't yet know. But the nightmare of the sea is finished. The challenge of the land is about to begin. The anchor drops in Sydney Cove with a splash and a rattle that feels more final than any before. This is it, the end of the line. The air is still, the water is calm, and the shore is just a stone's throw away. The relief is so profound it's almost a physical weight being lifted off your shoulders. The process of disembarkation begins. It's not a rush to freedom. It's a slow, organized, military-style operation. The Marines go first, securing a perimeter on the shore. Then, work parties of the fittest male convicts are ferried to land. You are chosen for one of these first groups. After 8 months of confinement, the feeling of solid, unmoving ground beneath your feet is deeply strange. Your legs, accustomed to the constant sway of the ship, feel wobbly and unreliable. You take a few tentative steps on the white sand of the beach, like a child learning to walk. The work begins immediately. There is no time for rest or reflection. Under the watchful eyes of the Marines, you are set to the grueling task of clearing the land. The strange, hardwooded trees do not yield easily to your English axes. The sun is relentless. The air is thick with the dust of your labor and the incessant, maddening buzz of flies. And then comes the moment you've been dreaming of for nearly a year. The first meal on land, a new beginning, a fresh start. You are assembled in your mess groups. The cook fires have been established on the shore. You watch with a hungry, hopeful heart as the cooks prepare the evening meal. You imagine roasted fish caught from the harbor, or perhaps some strange, exotic local vegetable. A feast to celebrate your survival and arrival. A ration is ladled into your familiar wooden bowl. You look down, and your heart sinks. It's salt beef, boiled in a pot. It's a piece of hardtack biscuit. It's a scoop of peas bros. It is the same meal. The exact same miserable, monotonous meal you have been eating for 8 months at sea. Nothing has changed. This is the brutal, shocking reality that dawns on you and every other convict. You have not arrived in a land of plenty. You have simply transported your prison and your prison diet to a new, much larger, and far more dangerous location. The fleet stores the barrels of salt meat, the sacks of weevil-white flour, the dried peas are all the food you have. The colony has no crops, no immediate way of producing its own food. You are entirely dependent on the rotting, dwindling provisions you brought with you. The food crisis has not ended, it has just entered a new, more desperate phase. This is a crucial turning point in the story of the First Fleet, and one that is central to understanding the early struggles of the colony. The planners in London had assumed that the new settlement would be able to start producing its own food almost immediately. They envisioned farms being planted, fish being caught, and the colony quickly becoming self-sufficient. This assumption was disastrously wrong. The soil around Sydney Cove was thin and sandy, completely unsuitable for the European crops they had brought with them. The seeds they had collected in Rio and the Cape struggled and failed in the harsh Australian climate. The fish in the harbor proved to be surprisingly elusive and difficult to catch in large numbers. The local kangaroos were fleet-footed and hard to hunt with their clumsy muskets. And here's a particularly poignant fact that underscores the desperation. The convicts were so ravenous for anything fresh and green that they would eat the local wild spinach, which they called New Zealand spinach. However, it was high in oxalates, which, if not cooked properly, could cause kidney stones and other health problems. In their desperate search for a cure for scurvy, they sometimes ended up poisoning themselves. The academic debate here focuses on the question of preparation and planning. Were the architects of the first fleet naive optimists who simply failed to do their homework? Did they willfully ignore the less glowing parts of Captain Cook's reports in favor of a more romantic vision of a South Seas paradise, or were they victims of the tyranny of distance, making the best plans they could with the limited and often inaccurate information available to them? Some historians are highly critical, pointing to the lack of skilled farmers among the convicts and the poor quality of the tools and seeds they were sent with. They argue that the entire enterprise was set up for failure, a disaster averted only by the sheer luck and resilience of the participants. Others eying the unprecedented nature of the undertaking. No one had ever tried to plant a European colony on such a remote and alien continent before. Mistakes were inevitable. You eat your salt beef, the familiar, unwelcome taste filling your mouth. You look around at the camp rising on the shore of Sydney Cove. It's a chaotic collection of tents and rough wooden huts. The sound of axes and hammers fills the air. This is not the new life you had imagined. The chains on your ankles may have been struck off, but you are still a prisoner. A prisoner of this strange, unwilling land, and a prisoner of the ever-present, soul-destroying hunger. But the struggle for survival, you realize with a sinking heart, has only just begun. Weeks have turned into months. The initial, chaotic camp at Sydney Cove is slowly, painstakingly, transforming into something resembling a settlement. Rough wooden huts are replacing the tattered tents. A governor's house, built with convict-made bricks, is rising on the western slope of the cove. A semblance of order is being imposed on this wild, alien landscape. But one thing has not changed: the hunger. The daily ration is still the same old story, but the portions are getting smaller. The storehouses are emptying at an alarming rate, and the few crops they've managed to plant have withered in the thin soil under the harsh sun. The colony is starving, slowly and inexorably. You stand on a ridge overlooking the harbor, perhaps on sentry duty or at the end of a long day of back-breaking labor. The sun is setting, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and pink. The water of the harbor is calm and glassy. From this distance, the fledgling settlement looks small and fragile, a tiny, precarious foothold of European existence on the edge of a vast, indifferent continent. You are a survivor. You have endured a journey that killed many and broke the health and spirit of many more. You look down at your hands. They are calloused and rough from the axe in the hoe. Your body is thin and weary, but it is functional. You are no longer the pale, desperate thief who was dragged from the alleys of London almost 2 years ago. That person is a ghost, a memory from another lifetime. You survived the floating hell of the hulks. You survived the initial misery of seas in Scus. You survived the holy trinity of the shipboard diet, the salt horse that felt like chewing on wood, the weevil-infested biscuits that you learned to accept as a source of extra protein, and the stubborn, tasteless peas that never quite cooked through. You survived the creeping horror of scurvy, that slow, internal rot that made your gums bleed and your teeth loosen. You remember the sublime, life-altering taste of that first orange at Tenerife, a burst of flavor and life that felt like a miracle. You remember the suffocating heat of the equator, the rotting food, and the desperate hunger that drove men to steal and face the brutal punishment of the lash. You remember the joy of the fresh food at Rio and the Cape, brief islands of relief in a sea of misery. You survived the terror of the roaring 40s, the mountainous waves and the screaming wind, that felt like the end of the world. You survived the psychological torment of the final leg of the voyage, the Phantom Lands and the Descentum Lands, and the descent into a diet that was more insect than flower. And you survived the crushing disappointment of arrival, the realization that the end of the voyage was not the end of the hunger. This entire experience, which for us has been a story, was your life. It's a foundational story of modern Australia, but it's often told in terms of ships, dates, and colonial policy. The reality, for you, was the daily, grinding, visceral experience of the food. Your entire existence was defined by the quest for calories, the state of the ship's stores, and the simple, desperate craving for something fresh. And here's one final, poignant piece of trivia. The motto of the new colony, which appeared on some of its earliest official documents, was Sic fortis Etrurius irrivitus. Etrurius irrivitus. Etruria grew strong. It was a hopeful, classical reference to the rise of ancient Rome from humble beginnings. But for the first few years, a more fitting motto might have been something like, I would kill for a potato. The struggle was that basic. The ultimate academic debate that encapsulates your entire journey is: this was the first fleet a success or a failure? On the one hand, it achieved its primary objective. It transported over 1,000 people to the other side of the world and established a permanent British presence on the continent, all with a remarkably low death rate for the era. By these metrics, it was a stunning success of logistics and seamanship. On the other hand, it delivered a population of sick, malnourished, and ill-equipped people to a place that was completely unprepared to support them, condemning them to years of near starvation. It was a human disaster that teetered on the brink of collapse for years, saved only by the timely arrival of the second and third fleets with more supplies. By these metrics, it was a catastrophic failure of planning. The truth, as you stand here watching the last light fade from the sky, is that it was both. It was a triumph of endurance and a tragedy of planning. You are living proof of that contradiction. You turn your back on the harbor and walk towards the flickering lights of the cook fires. You know what will be for dinner. It will be the same as yesterday and the day before, but you will beat it. And you will survive. Because that is what you do. Your journey on the sea is over, but your story? The story of a convict in a strange new land has just begun. And now, the story fades. The sounds of the struggling colony, the clang of the hammer, the murmur of the hungry convicts. They all begin to soften, receding into the background like the tide pulling away from the shore. The image of that rugged coastline, under a sky full of unfamiliar stars, begins to blur at the edges. The sharp pang of hunger you felt, the gritty texture of the biscuit, the aching in your bones, it all dissolves into a gentle, dreamlike memory. You are no longer there, standing on that precarious edge of a new world. You are here, now, safe and comfortable. The journey is over. The hardships are just echoes in a story that has been told. Feel the weight of your own comfortable blanket, the softness of your pillow. Listen to the quiet hum of your own room, a sound of peace and stillness. Let the last vestiges of the story drift away. Let your mind become as calm and as quiet as the deep, protected waters of Sydney Cove at midnight. There are no more storms to endure, no more rations to worry about. There is only this moment of quiet, this gentle descent into a deep and restorative sleep. You are safe. You are at peace. And the night is here to hold you. The end of the article. Good night.